I'm going to hit go live now.
Yep, there you go. A lot of people waiting. Good stuff.
Okay. It seems like we're live now. Great. Thank you so much for everyone who's been waiting around. Apologies for the delay. We've been facing technical difficulties dealing with Skype. We're now using Zoom, so hopefully this will be a lot clearer. We had to restart a couple times, so thank you for all being here. So first, welcome back, friends, to the Hill of Roses, where we come once again to celebrate the best contributors of our united progressive movement. This week, we are in for a very special treat as we begin our first ever candidate supporter debate, where we will be having 3 nominated representatives from 3 of the candidate campaigns squaring off to discuss why their candidates' approach to the issues are the most effective. Joining us today is Scott Santens, representing Andrew Yang, Stephanie Quilao, representing Bernie Sanders, as well as Niko House, representing Tulsi Gabbard. Before going into the rules of today's debate, I'd like to give each of our friends who've joined us here today a chance to introduce themselves to the audience. So please let our rosebuds out there today watching live where you're from, what you do full time, and what was the moment in which you realized you would be joining your candidate's movement. I'll start right now first with Scott. Scott, what led you to join Andrew Yang, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Scott Santens. I'm living here in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I got into basic income back in 2013, and I actually met Andrew Yang, and we became friends back in late 2015, early 2016, I believe. And so I would say I got into Yang when he told me that he was thinking of running for president. I was like, yeah, that would be great. You should do that. So here I am.
Great. How about you, Stephanie? What got you on board with Bernie, and where are you from, as well as what you do for a living?
So, hey everyone. So I'm here in the Bay Area in California, and I'm a little on my background. So I spent 20 years in Silicon Valley in corporate marketing and tech. I worked at NVIDIA when it was a startup. So I got to experience that whole exciting, boom, and then went to Microsoft and evangelized their consumer products there. Left, became a professional blogger, and then the startup bug never leaves you, so I became the founder of my own mobile app startup. And then in 2015, through a random video on Facebook, I saw this video of Bernie Sanders after a rally he did in Iowa. And this was the first time in my life I had ever seen a politician talk about how the system was rigged. And before that, I was completely one of those voters that are completely apathetic, the ones that people hate. Like I didn't vote, I didn't care. And then this video was not even, 4 minutes. I watched the entire thing and I was like, who is this guy? I can't believe what I'm hearing. So I went on Google, researched him, and I was just blown away by his consistency, what he stood for, and that he has never taken a dime from billionaires, super PACs, or any of that stuff. So then I read in his policies, and then not only did I get on board, I became a delegate for him. So I was one of Bernie's California delegates in 2016 and went to Philadelphia and got to experience, the process of the DNC and that whole thing. So that was a really eye-opening process for me. So again, he's running in 2020 and I'm 110% on board because this time we will win.
That's great to hear. How about you, Niko? What led you to join Tulsi Gabbard, and where are you from, as well as what you do for a little bit?
So it's funny, my story isn't all that different from Steph's. I actually live in Miami, Florida, but I actually got into Tulsi Gabbard by way of Bernie Sanders, like many Tulsi Gabbard supporters. Long story short, I was a huge Bernie Sanders supporter, the former acting state director for North Carolina and the founder of Carolina Students for Bernie Sanders. Discovered some rigging. That's a whole different story. But the first person I talked to about this would actually hear out what I had to say was actually Tulsi Gabbard. I talked to her on the phone for an hour about this. She had no idea who I was. I was just a senior in college, and she took my word for it. Less than a year later, she introduced the Securing Americans Elections Act. Fast forward, we have a couple conversations, and then we do an interview. But before that interview, it's the first time I actually got to meet with her, interact with her in person. I asked her, after watching a few of her videos from 2012, and compared to like how she speaks and how she carries herself now. And I said, what the hell happened? Because clearly you're not the same person. Like, not that she was a bad person in 2012, but just who she is in 2019, 2018 compared to then, like it's just night and day. And she just told me, peeling back the layers of all the lies that we have been fed by corporations, by the foreign policy, establishment, the military industrial complex, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, peeling through all those lies, like, you just can't come out the same when you end up on the other side. And it was like that moment that I was like, oh no, she's the real deal. This isn't a game for her. And basically the next morning, I was kind of like on the fence about it. And then the next morning I decided to endorse her at her rally in LA.
Very cool. Well, we're really honored to have you all here today. And I know the fans out there right now are incredibly proud of all three of you for stepping up to do this. Today will be about uniting together to figure out the best solutions for some of the most pressing challenges of our time. These are all great candidates who deserve your vote if nominated in November, and deserve the respect of an open ear to earnestly listen to a new perspective. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get into the agenda for the debate ahead and the rules our participants should be following today, as we have an incredibly jam-packed positive policy and movement building conversation ahead. So our representatives will be tasked with 10 questions that all will be answered. They'll have one individual question coming to them from our audience. They will have 2 individual questions coming from each of the other representatives here today. And they will have 1 individual question coming from me, as well as their closing remarks. In today's debate, there will be 5 policy sections: the environment, healthcare, the economy, education, and foreign policy. We'll be asking 2 everyone answers questions within a policy section, and then we will alternate with our individual questions, starting with my question, then the 2 by our representatives, and then finally the audience's question.
Let me just say right now, John, before we get started, you should replace Chuck Todd the next time they host a debate. Just replace him immediately. You're already better as a moderator. So
much appreciated, Niko. We're going to have a lot today, and rather than speaking so much myself like Chuck Todd did himself, I want to make sure that all 3 of you are actually the ones speaking and giving our fans some extra knowledge out there.
Good
so
stuff.
A little bit more details on like the rules. Each question is going to be given 90 seconds per round of responding, with no hard limits, but we encourage the guests to keep in mind when any of our participants are going over their targeted allotment. Each question will be given 3 rounds to respond. First, to answer the question, second as a rebuttal to the other 2 representatives, and then finally third as either a continued rebuttal or closing thoughts. If a representative does not know the answer to what their candidate believes, they may answer what they personally believe, but they should make note that there is a distinction between their position and the candidates. As we know, our guests are also incredibly smart at coming up with their own solutions to these challenges as well. So, Scott, Stephanie, and Niko, do you have any questions about the rules I've laid out for you?
Can we just all raise our hands to answer questions together? For like quick, just 5-second questions. I don't really want to get into any details and stuff. So
sure, we could do that at the end.
I'm being sarcastic.
I mean, at the end of the 3 rounds, certainly, if anyone wants to add just a final 5-second thought, that's fine. But we're not going to drag it out into minutes.
So, one quick question: are we going to do a closing statement, or it just?
Yeah, no, we're going to do a closing statement.
Okay.
Can I not be blamed for anything Assad has done this debate? I really appreciate it. I'm not prepared like Tulsi is.
Certainly. I don't think Niko went on any fact-finding missions. Okay, great. So upon announcing this event, we had done a pre-debate polling, and the results ended up with Andrew Yang in first with 47%, Bernie Sanders with 41%, and Tulsi Gabbard with 8%, as well as 3% responding with none of the above. The reward of winning this poll was the ability to pick one spot in today's response lineup order. So, Scott, which position will you be choosing for your position in response?
I'll take last.
We'll take last. Okay, Stephanie, you came in second. Which would you like, first or second?
Second.
Okay, perfect. Our lineup is set. The rules have been explained. It's time for debate, and our first topic is the environment. So, all three candidates have come out with substantial plans on how they best see to address the existential threat that is climate change. Bernie Sanders with his Green New Deal, Tulsi Gabbard with her OFF Act, and Andrew Yang's lower emissions, higher ground plan. Representatives, why do you believe your candidate's plan is the best to address our current environmental crisis? Stephanie, we'll begin with you.
Okay, Green New Deal. So when the new president takes office in 2021, we have 10 years. So we have to rapidly move our entire energy system over into renewables. Bernie Sanders has a consistent history going back to like the 70s and 80s of him talking about climate action. He has launched, the most aggressive Green New Deal plan, right? We're talking about $16 trillion, which includes 20 million jobs. The biggest thing, though, is that with a President Bernie Sanders, he will stand up to the big fossil fuel industry. This, above like everything else, is most important, that we stand up to the power structures and tell the fossil fuel industry no more. In his Green New Deal plan, one of the biggest things is that he will punish and penalize big fossil fuels. He will take away their subsidies. Globally right now, subsidies for fossil fuels is around 5 trillion, in subsidies for fossil fuels. So in the United States, Bernie's just going to take all of that and move that over into, again, transforming our energy system. But more importantly, he has a grassroots movement of millions of Americans who are going to demand change. And we've seen an example of this recently with the DNC voting, voting no on the climate debate. You had the Sunrise Movement out there, and people are angry. So, along with having a plan, a candidate, whoever is in office, needs millions of Americans to rally together and say, we're having enough, and to vote out the climate deniers. Because that's another important thing. Even if we have a progressive president, if we don't have a progressive House and Senate, we're not going to get very far. And like the climate deniers, so we just have to move all of them out. So President Sanders on day one will declare a climate emergency. He will throw the weight of the White House behind the Green New Deal and make it a top priority.
Niko, why do you believe that Tulsi Gabbard's OFF Act is the best plan available?
Okay, so for those of you who do not know, the only reason that Tulsi Gabbard actually ended up getting involved in politics was because of climate change and the environment. Now, there's something unique to Tulsi that really every other candidate, whether it be running for president or running for the legislature, have just now caught up to, which is the OFF Act. Now, as most people should know by now, the OFF Act is the Off Fossil Fuels Act. And that is very important because it is very explicit. Both versions of the Green New Deal do not explicitly say they're going to get off of fossil fuels. In fact, if you go to like Bernie Sanders' website, for example, it does say that we want to transition to renewables, but it doesn't say huge transitions or complete and total transition off of fossil fuels. Now, why is this important? Because AOC and everybody who pushed the Green New Deal pushed the OFF Act first. The Green New Deal is a resolution. However, the OFF Act is a bill. It's a bill that's already been put together. It's a bill that removes us from fossil fuels, that converts to alternative energy, that has a job transition program, very similar to Bernie Sanders, except for this one, it's already been put in the works once again because it's a bill. This is the most aggressive climate change legislation, not just in this country, but around the world. It's been endorsed by over 400 climate change and environmentalist organizations. It deals with nuclear energy. something that for whatever reason, the other climate plans have failed to do. I don't know why people decide to ignore this fact, because we are still dealing with the repercussions of Fukushima right now, and we still have not dealt with our issue of what we do with nuclear waste after we dispose of it. This is something that this Union of Concerned Scientists talks about often. They have an entire website dedicated to this. Tulsi Gabbard's Off Act is the only legislation that deals with it. Now, when we're talking about just how it looks aesthetically, as far as for whatever reason, the Green New Deal does look better for marketing, but there doesn't seem to be huge strides made in getting it passed right now. But on the other side of that fence, you see the Off Act, which is an actual bill, is an actual plan. We say that climate change is an emergency, that we shouldn't be debating if it exists, but whether or not we have solutions. We have a solution, and yet the establishment is constantly ignoring the best plan endorsed by over 400 climate and environmental organizations. Why would that be? Because it's actually going to achieve what we need it to achieve by 2027. That's what the goal is. And so because of that fact, that's why Tulsi's Off Act is the best plan, because once the entire establishment ignores it because of its efficaciousness, that is the main sign that shows us that's the plan we should be pursuing.
Okay. How about you, Scott? Why do you believe the lower emissions higher ground plan is the best to address our climate emergency?
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to say like how cool it is that we're here discussing policies. And I mean, this is like, it's new really in history, where people can speak in this kind of forum and share it with so many other people. And I think that even says something about our media as we know it, where we're able to decentralize away from that and be more independent and really kind of do what the media is not doing. And for me, I'm even able to focus on this because I crowdfunded my own basic income, and I've had a basic income since January of 2016. So I know what economic security feels like. And that's really the missing thing to me, that is the absolute top thing that makes Yang's plan so valuable and so effective, is that people can't think about the end of the world if all you can think about is the end of the month. And that quote is essentially a paraphrasing from one of the Yellow Vest protesters. And so we see that something that's important to fight against climate change can result in people hitting the streets and fighting against it if it means to them that they might end up paying more, that it could somehow be hurt, especially if they feel that they're barely surviving. So right now, there is essentially an economic boot on everyone's throats in the US. And we are just too focused on day-to-day, month-to-month survival in order to really think about the seriousness of climate change and to really focus on the future of climate change. So that is the major point that stands out from any other candidate's plan, really, is that he is centralizing universal basic income as a major point of this. Now, once you remove the economic boot from people's throats and people feel economic security, which, by the way, economic security was a central component really written into the Green New Deal. So it was seen even there that it was important. But with unconditional economic security, people can really start focusing on this. And then he's got his 5-point approach, which I think is great. His 5-point approach is, all right, let's focus on domestic sustainability. And let's actually work with other countries to make the rest of the world sustainable too. And actually, let's work on getting higher ground, both literally and figuratively. And let's also, and I say like the higher ground is important to me as someone from New Orleans as well. I've dealt with this. I know what it means like to evacuate to higher ground. And I know that that costs money, and people are not able to evacuate because they don't have money, or they are able to because they do. And so this is a central component. And then the fourth part is that we've got to reverse what we've done. We've got to invest in technologies that can actually reverse climate change. And fifth, if we're going to keep going through presidency after presidency and Congress after Congress, we've actually got to write this into the Constitution that this is really important. And I think that that's really a brilliant aspect of Yang's plan as well, is that this has to be written in the Constitution.
Okay, great. So Stephanie, I'm curious, why do you believe the proposals from the other candidates here are insufficient to address this challenge?
I couldn't hear you. Your sound is, sorry.
Yeah, the question was, why do you believe that the other candidates' plans here are insufficient compared to the Green New Deal?
Well, first of all, I mean, I think we should just acknowledge as progressives that we have like options, and there's a bunch of great ideas and plans. So really it just comes back to like, what do we decide as a whole is the most effective to, again, rapidly get this transformation, you know, to happen? Because again, we have less than 10 years. So one of the things that I want to point out that is significant is that, you know, Bernie Sanders is also calling out for an all-out ban on fracking. So, you know, which is significant. I mean, and he's not just keeping it to fracking on public lands. So here in California, we have a lot of fracking going on, and, you know, Trump has now opened that up, our public lands, to fracking. So, you know, when you look at a lot of the new drilling things that are, you know, permits that have come out, they're actually on private lands. So we can do things like cap and trade, which is like a big program we have in California. But if we don't stop the fracking, and what a lot of people don't realize, the thing with fracking is that methane gas has 86 times the global warming power of carbon. So that above everything has got to be stopped. I mean, the fracking is like a big thing. And that means that, you know, going up against the big fossil fuel companies is going to be a big deal. And so that's one of the things that stands out above the others is that, again, Bernie is going after the power structures of the big fossil fuel industry, and he's telling them no. He's going to cut off the subsidies, which again are in the trillions of dollars. He's going to prioritize the transition of, you know, our energy system, but also too, you know, with the federal jobs guarantee program, a bulk of that is to transition over. Like, we have to build all these systems. We need physical bodies to move all of these, you know, this whole system over in a very short period of time. So that's another big significant thing, is that, you know, not just the economics, and I agree, people are just drowning in, you know, in debt. They can't see, you know, the forest beyond the trees right now because they're just hemorrhaging where they're at. However, you know, we have 10 years. Like, this is monumental. And the fact that, like, we're not like in panic mode right now is a big issue. And a lot of that too has to do with the media. So Bernie has also come out with a plan dealing with the media, and that we've got to talk, media coverage of the climate crisis has got to be more prevalent on our media so people know. I mean, I talk to people who don't even think it's a problem. So that's another big thing. You know, Bernie has a policy that addresses, you know, the media. So, and then combined with a grassroots movement, because again, we can have the smartest, greatest president. If we don't have a Congress that supports that president, and if we don't get millions of Americans pressuring everyone from like school board on up, so it's just not like our Congress, we need from like the local level, the state level, and all of that up. So Bernie, again, why he focuses on this movement and political revolution is that, again, we're not going to do anything unless all Americans like decide, oh my God, this is a problem. We've got to mobilize, and we've got to do it now.
Yeah, certainly understandable. Niko, why do you believe that Tulsi's off act compared to these other two is super superior? What do you find that is a little bit lacking in the other plan?
So let me just say, because of the emergency that climate change has caused, I think that one thing stands out to me above all else, which is conviction. Now, what do I mean by that? So, for example, in Bernie Sanders' case, do I believe he'll fight for climate change 100%? But the issue is he co-sponsored legislation recently that was put together by Kamala Levin, a former fracking lobbyist, and Gillibrand. This was to convert to electric cars, but those electric cars specifically run off of fuel cells. These fuel cells have to be filled by fracking, and which is why that bill doesn't ban fracking. Not Bernie's version, but the Green New Deal in the House, which they would have to hash it out when they go to committee. That version doesn't even address fracking. However, Tulsi's bill, the actionable legislation that we already have put together by climate scientists, already endorsed by 400 climate environmental organizations, that bill bans fracking. That bill bans fossil fuels. The question then comes, will you do what's necessary and put up that fight once you get into office, or will you capitulate based off of wherever the, wherever it is, there's different reasons why you might capitulate. But we're talking about the person who left her vice chairwoman position, right? We're talking about the person who told everybody, like on my show, exactly how she got into the Council of Foreign Relations and how she's not planning on leaving if she can stay in there and fight. We're talking about the person who continuously stands up to the DNC, both parties, and the foreign policy establishment, even though she's taken a hit. She could have just sat back and endorsed Bernie again. But instead, she is putting her money where her mouth is. And that conviction to fight, both in the House and in the Senate, when you're going to have to go back and forth with them as a president, is a big deal. As far as the financial security aspect is concerned, to Scott's point, he is actually correct about that to a degree. But I would say two things. History has shown us that ultimate desperation causes revolution, not a placation of my finances or finance, right? Just an extra $12,000 a month is going to keep people placated, but being dead broke will make you revolt, just to say. But UBI is not a bad plan inherently, and Tulsi actually agrees with that. So in the vacuum of this conversation, yeah, we can still get UBI if Andrew Yang wants to be a policy advisor on Tulsi's administration, which we'd be happy to have him. But Tulsi's plan that she's been working on for literally 4 or 5 years now, that she's putting 4 or 5 years of manpower and labor hours into, is already here. It's already actionable. It was already good enough for AOC Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and everybody else to sign on to before they even got elected. Justice Democrats almost unanimously signed on to this legislation because it is that good. So I think when we have plans in front of us, the plans are great. But what's wrong? We don't have that much time because it's like I just said, to have a good legislation took 4 or 5 years to perfect. We don't have 4 or 5 more years to perfect the legislation that will eventually maybe come out under the other 2 candidates.
Certainly understandable. So Scott, what response do you have for Niko and Stephanie? Where are their plans lacking currently?
Well, okay. I think that, again, part of this is that Yang has essentially a system of plans that they work together and they enhance each other. And I think the one of the missing ingredients, and possibly the biggest missing ingredient, goes back to really, why have we taken so long to get around to confronting climate change? What still blocks us from passing these plans that are even, people have worked on them, they've been pitched. Why aren't we enacting these things? And of course, we all know that this is lobbyist dollars in action. And this is the result of just decades of lobbying. And now here we are. Like, our system is corrupt, and it makes it really difficult to actually get things done that we need to get done. So when it comes to Yang's plan, part of this too is he's for democracy dollars, which is $100 that would be provided per citizen that they could donate to any campaign that they want. And this is it's a very powerful idea that would essentially wash out the power of the lobbyists with one fell swoop. Because yeah, we do need to also reverse Citizens United. We do need an amendment about corporations are not people. We need to fix this problem with money and politics. But that's inherently a barrier as well, because how are you supposed to fix that? It just, how are they going to go out when they're the ones who are corrupt? So if we're able to get democracy dollars in there and people are able to actually widely contribute to this, then we actually can make a government that starts working for us instead of for the lobbyists. And that's when we can start breaking through this barrier and start passing the rest of the stuff that we need to pass as well. And I think that aside from economic insecurity being a barrier to confronting and getting these plans in action, it's also this inability, this weakening of democracy. So I recommend everyone out there to look up Yang's Restoring Democracy plan and Restoring Trust in Government. It's a long read, but if you get through it, I mean, this is really, it's powerful to actually get through, to actually restore and improve our democracy. And, we haven't been doing that. And, we've got to start. In fact, it's because of this plan that Yang is the only candidate with an A+ from Equal Citizens for democracy. And I think that says a lot. So I think that that's one of the main ones as well. And aside from a lot of the other democracy improving things and actually get this passed. And then as far as like the kind of details of the other stuff, yeah, I agree with Stephanie that definitely part of this is making sure that we get Congress people elected who are actually going to do this stuff. No more, deniers, they can't get in there. And also people who are willing to work across the aisle to get stuff passed, like the carbon dividend. I mean, that's a bill that's out there right now that should definitely be passed because that would do a lot. And to Niko's point too, I like that nuclear is part of her plan as well. And I think that, I like that Yang is looking at all these potential possibilities and saying, all right, let's just be extremely pragmatic. Let's bring everything we can to this picture and let's just do everything we can in order to fight climate change and reverse its effects. So
I want to be clear. Tulsi's removes nuclear energy, period, citing a bunch of studies about nuclear waste and things like that. I didn't mean to confuse anybody.
Yeah, no, you confused me because you just said that. All right.
My apologies.
Yeah, and to be clear too, Bernie Sanders he doesn't have nuclear in his plan as well. His is focused on renewables.
Yeah, so I guess I'll revise that point, saying that I think it's incredible that we got a candidate that's actually got everything on the table and is not saying, oh, let's not do that, even though the evidence says that that is a good idea, and that by getting away from nuclear, we're actually kind of shooting ourselves in the foot as far as the total reduction of emissions that we could otherwise be doing.
So I'd be curious, Stephanie, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to lend the audience on why Bernie's domestic strategy on this environmental crisis is the best?
Yeah, again, sorry, John, you're...
Yeah. So let me repeat that. The question is, do you have any final remarks on why you believe that Bernie Sanders' plan on domestic strategy to handle the environmental crisis is the most effective?
Again, I go back to, we can have great plans, but again, even like Niko said, we need a president that has conviction, that will prioritize climate change. It will declare it an emergency, will mobilize the entire country, and then have an infrastructure for us to take action on that plan, which is what the Green New Deal with the federal jobs guarantee program and all the policies under that. But again, going back to going up against the power structures, because the biggest problem we have now and why we're not mobilized now is because of the fossil fuel industry, and nobody's standing up to them. Nobody's saying no, nobody's saying enough. I mean, even like with the fracking issue, again, we have a lot of politicians who say, oh yeah, I'm not for fracking, and then quietly go and approve of like drilling deals, or they work with the fossil fuel industry because they're getting lots of campaign money, and the lobbies for big fossil fuels are huge and powerful. So until we keep that in check, I mean, all of us have great plans, but again, until we attack and tackle the power structure that is preventing all of this from happening, I mean, and then on top of that, we have the Republican Party to deal with, right? So it's not just the fossil fuel industry. We have one party in our two-party system that is fighting this tooth and nail. So again, I think it goes even beyond like, how do we work across the aisle? I mean, how do you work with people who don't even believe climate change is real or that it's an emergency? So, I mean,
pull out that pen.
I mean,
executive.
Yeah, block there. So again, and even the Democrats, we have the corporate Democrats who are still taking money from big fossil fuels, and they're still like letting that happen. So it's not even just like, okay, we elect all Dems, because if there's not enough progressive Dems in there, then again, the corporatist Dems can still take over and still block everything. And then now we have Pelosi too with the pay-go rule, right? So anything that involves taxes, like she can just quickly kill that with the pay-go rule, right? So again, we got to get like a progressive like Congress in there to get any of these ideas passed.
Certainly a representative point when we nominate people like Joe Manchin to head up our energy committee.
Exactly.
Right.
So,
exactly.
Niko, I'd be curious, why do you believe Tulsi has the best domestic strategy on climate change?
Well, it isn't just me. Like I said, 400 environmental and climate change organizations think she has the best one. AOC thinks she has the best one. Ilhan Omar, Bernie Sanders at one point. Basically, the only thing that changed was that she ran for president, and everybody all of a sudden, because you got to do what you got to do, right? Everything is about, positioning yourself for the next move when it comes to politics. But that does not change the fact that she still had and does have the best plan. I think that Scott and Stephanie brought up a brilliant point. We have to get down to the root cause, which is lobbying and corruption. Tulsi does have an anti-corruption plan, but she's actually, out of the ones who are in the legislature, so Yang, this isn't really his fault, but she's the only one that co-sponsored and endorsed the move to amend, which is an amendment that would completely remove big money from politics. And it's, once again, unfortunately, a lot of you are probably hearing it from my mouth for the first time, because these are the issues that aren't discussed enough, which is why we have to discuss them here. But that's what that amendment to the Constitution would do. And it's a big deal for her. But once again, we don't get to discuss this because she always gets asked about Assad. But the move to amend would deal with the structural issues spoken by Scott and by Steph. And then, of course, once again, you don't take my word for it. 400 environmental and climate change organizations also say that the OFF Act is the best legislation. And so, combination of anti-corruption and getting the best legislation passed without those lobbyists being there. Once again, the reason that it's being blocked off in silence and isn't being discussed isn't because it's not great. It's because that's how politics works. When something is great for you, then it won't be discussed. It's like this election integrity legislation. Everybody wants that election integrity legislation now. Moscow, Mitch, and all that. They don't know that election integrity legislation is horrible. Tulsi's legislation is what that legislation actually was based off of. They took it, they watered it down, they put a bunch of pork barrel in it, and it's trash. But you hear about that. You don't hear about the actual Securing America's Elections Act for the same reason, because it does what it's intended to do rather than what the lobbyists wanted to do.
Yes, certainly agree with that point on the election security. Scott, why do you believe Andrew Yang has the most effective domestic strategy plan for the environment?
Yeah, so the two things here, besides what I've already said, is first of all, we get what we measure, and Yang understands that. And so part of this, one of his main components is about the human-centered capitalism and creating an American scorecard to measure things outside of GDP. Because if we follow GDP as the main important thing, then we're going to follow it right off the cliff, which is what we are doing. Is it in all of this coal power and stuff, and all of these the fossil fuels we've been doing and everything? It's all good for GDP. It's been growing GDP, but it's been warming the planet. So we've got to get outside of these other these measurements that we consider to be good for us when they're not. So that's one thing about this. Again, that's not considered part of his climate plan, but I think it interacts very strongly with it. And also, again, I guess I just want to focus too on this higher ground thinking, because it was something that was kind of a laugh line. People kind of joked about it during and after the debate when he mentioned higher ground.
That is not a joke.
Yeah, it's really. I live in New Orleans. This is not a joke, and yeah, it's a great point that here we are today. It was the hurricane coming to Florida was just upgraded to a Cat 5, and so what happens to these people? First of all, again, if you need to evacuate, that's expensive. And a lot of people, when it comes to evacuating, the people who stay behind because they can't afford to evacuate. And so then you go out, and then let's say you come back, and let's say things are destroyed. And so then you've got to start over. And sure, let's say maybe you've got insurance on your house and whatnot. It's like, well, you still got to wait for those paychecks. Maybe you lost your job because that was destroyed. And so this higher ground it's important to think of it both literally and figuratively. We've got to enable people to reach higher ground. We've got to be able to be more resilient. So we've got to increase our climate resilience. And basic income actually does a lot. It's the biggest thing I would say that increases climate resilience is having that fully unconditional basic income that enables people to go, follows them wherever they are, and permanently lifts people. And the other part of it is that, yeah, we do need to make these investments in our infrastructure. We need to make investments in our cities to actually protect more against what is already happening. And it's this thinking, that like this, it's an insane logic that says that all this stuff, this trillions of dollars we need to spend to combat climate change is expensive. Like, no, it's not expensive. The destruction of our ecosystems are expensive. All these disasters that happen that are bigger and more frequent, that is hugely expensive. So we need to think more about preventative stuff and resiliency stuff and not laugh at this. That this is like serious, and we need to get this stuff happening immediately. And we need to, avoid these costs where we can. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We got to think about that. And when it comes to Yang, he's definitely thinking about that.
Yes, I think all of these plans have great proposals within them. However, one of the biggest challenges we face is this is truly a global issue. We, as the United States of America, are only contributing 16% of global emissions. So, representatives, I'm curious, how would your candidate be the most effective at leading a global effort on climate change? Stephanie, I'll begin with you.
Well, first, and I know everyone will agree with this, our president will, on day one, get back into the Paris Agreement. So that's got to be square one, and then declare a climate emergency. So the United States, as the richest country in the world, we have the power to say, look, all of us, we need to come together, and we've got to stop this because, again, we have less than 10 years. So this is a great opportunity for the United States, again, to take the leadership on this. And, the change starts with ourselves. Other countries look at, well, what is the United States doing? So if we're not an example, then it's going to be hard to argue for around, the world. So again, that it goes back to like, how immediate do we rally the American people? Do we get the, system changed over? But that's again, a big thing. And then if we see people rallying around, look, what's been inspiring lately, you see people in like the protests in Hong Kong, the yellow vests in Puerto Rico, millions of people are like, we're done, we're enough. We're not doing that in the United States. It's kind of mind-boggling to me, even given this president we have, why millions of us haven't taken to the streets just because of him, just to protest what he's been doing, right? So we need to show that that dire need ourselves, again, as a people. So again, we got to start here, and then globally, so we can be the example globally. And so again, a big thing is standing up, fossil fuel industry. So President Sanders, he starts cutting off that fossil fuel money, and then you watch the industry react, and then then he's like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. I'm moving there. He's also going to cut the military budget. So wait till the military industrial complex, wait for that reaction, right? But that also shows the other countries like, wow, they're serious, because the United States has more money in our military than 10 countries combined. So President Sanders comes in, cuts that, and says, no, we're moving it over to our energy system. Again, other countries look at that and go, okay, so where are we going to look at the greed at the top, the power structures that have prevented any climate, action or declaration of an emergency, and mobilize that immediately. And then we've got to get more involved with the United Nations, work with them. Again, in like our current position has just been standoffish, like, this me, America, it's just about us. But which is fine if we're going to be a global leader, like, okay, let it be us, and we're okay, world, let's do this. Humans, we need to agree, we got to save the planet. So it starts with the United States. And I think of Bernie Sanders, because again, he has decades of consistency of addressing climate change and standing up to the power structures and rallying millions of people, will be that demonstration to the rest of the world that we are serious, that we're going to do this, and he will make it happen, and he will not let big fossil fuels he's not including them in the plan, okay? So that's a really huge thing. They are not included in the plan.
So Niko, I'd be curious, why do you think Tulsi is more effective at leading the world on this engagement?
Excuse me, John, did you say foreign policy? Just curious. No, I'm just kidding. So I think there's one thing that needs to be understood by everybody here, that foreign policy, once again, is always directly and symbiotically tied to domestic policy. And obviously, Tulsi has the most positive experience in that department, and has demonstrated consistently and consistency throughout this entire election when it comes to foreign policy. I wonder if anybody here knew, but according to Brown University, there was a study done. The United States military is the largest contributor to the military, or excuse me, to climate change. Now, obviously, Tulsi only has about a 7-8 year voting record here, but she has the conviction and has been the main one calling out the foreign policy establishment and the military industrial complex. The Pentagon, it actually contributes more to climate change than every other agency in the United States. So it's like, clearly we have a problem that I think a lot of people have not really attributed to climate change or thinks contributes to climate change, but that's a huge part of it. Tulsi is the only candidate that addresses that substantively, not just mentions it, casually in a speech every now and then, but this is her entire goal. Why would I think that? Well, let's look at the conversation she had with Katie and Matt Taibbi in that Rolling Stones interview. She talks about the fact that we have to sit down with Russia. We have to sit down with Putin. We can't keep demonizing him. We can't keep going all out on these sanctions. We have to have a real conversation. We can't divvy up who we talk to about climate change amongst or dichotomizing, as allies and enemies. No, it's, hey, we are all going to live on this planet together, or we're all going to die together. So we need to figure this out. The only issue I have with the Paris Accords is that that's what it seems to do. It doesn't actually attempt to reach out to adversaries, if you will, of the West. I didn't see enough inclusion of African countries from the African Union. These are people that Tulsi strongly encourages talking to because we need a united effort. One of the reasons she talked to Modi in that trip that she often gets chastised about, which she talked to both Modi and the opposition, was because Modi and India in general were on the come up. Technologically, they were engaging with trade with all countries, no matter whether or not they were adversaries. For example, they engaged with trade with both Iran and Israel regularly. And so Tulsi wanted to get America there to have positive influence on how they participate in the world economy, being part of that world economy in a real way for the first time. That is what Tulsi will do. And you've seen that she will continue to take the heat to talk to allies or to talk to anybody, like we need to talk to China because they're a huge contributor as well. Russia, also a huge contributor. Obviously, our leaders here. A lot of countries that we are not quote unquote allies with, and therefore we will not quote unquote talk to, they still contribute largely to climate change. And we need somebody who is going to not demonize them. That's the important part, because why would I want to even engage in a climate change discussion if we're going to demonize them? Tulsi is the only one that is not dichotomize our foreign policy with allies and adversaries, but progress and peace and unity moving forward. So I think that's why she's best to lead that global movement towards positive gains in climate change.
Scott, why do you think Andrew Yang is the most effective on this topic of leading a global effort on climate change?
Yeah, so I want to go back again to just the importance of economic security. Like, I think that this brings me to one of the reasons why I've been pushing so hard for unconditional basic income for years now, is I feel that this is really a major stumbling block. Poverty, rising insecurity, rising instability, these things prevent people from caring about these larger issues. And when it comes to the world stage, like part of Yang's plan is to work with these other countries and to really help essentially export these technologies that they need. They need green technologies. We need to make it so that it is affordable for these other countries to use these sustainable energy technologies and to avoid, say, buying cheap plants from China to burn coal, because that's the cheapest thing that they've got, and they've got to develop too. So there's a barrier there, because like how excited about helping other countries are Americans when they feel that they just can't, they're not sure if they're going to be able to pay their bills next month. This is part of the thing why Trump is president. that he was talking about the things that people were feeling, and his solutions were terrible, but he was talking about some of these actual problems, and these problems prevent us from tackling these larger problems. So I think that we've got to get our stuff in order here in the US in order to really unleash the ability for people to support everything that we need to do to get the rest of the world onto the same page, so that we can all be fighting climate change together. And I would also hope that other countries would see the success of basic income in our country and be like, oh yeah, we got to do that too, because then they could unleash their own citizens and free them from this cognitive burden that rising economic insecurity is.
So Stephanie, I'd be curious, do you believe that the other two candidates are qualified to lead this effort?
To lead the green or climate effort? With Tulsi, what I think is very strong about her is foreign policy, because again, one of the big issues we have with our interventionist wars is fighting basically for oil. And, she's very strong there on policy. So, that will go a long way. With Andrew Yang, he's got great ideas and enthusiasm. I would like to see him run for elected office. I would like to see him, come in and, run for an office, run a city, run a state, run for Senate, or, to see him create a movement. I mean, with UBI, what also needs for UBI to happen is there needs to be a UBI movement. So along with that, if he can demonstrate that he can mobilize millions of Americans, and then again, get some experience in elected office. And that for me personally as a voter, with all candidates, I want someone with experience, someone who has written bills, someone who has passed legislation, someone who has worked in Congress, someone, who has had to deal with, a president like what we have right now, right? And then again, foreign policy is a big thing too, because again, a lot of our issues go around, wars over oil. And so, that's something I think about when we move over to renewables and oil is not needed anymore. Like, what's going to happen in those areas, those countries? They're like, well, wait a minute, because right now they're using oil as, bargaining with us. But once that's gone, so what's their bargaining tool with it? So we don't have that. That's not going to be there anymore. So, we potentially could have new wars over water, right? Water could be the next oil as the climate crisis gets worse. So then we're fighting over water, and then food, where even land, where are we going to have land to even grow food? So, again, that's where I just think, President Bernie Sanders is best positioned because he's got decades of fighting for climate action. He has decades of experience in the House, in the Senate, and he has created a movement of people to get behind this.
So Niko, do you believe Bernie Sanders and Andrew Yang are equipped to lead a global effort on climate change?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe both are. I'm surprised that Steph didn't bring this part up, but Bernie is one of the reasons that Burlington, Vermont is at 99% renewable energy. He led that charge there while he was mayor, and it continued after he left. Yang has a very outside of the box unique thought process. I don't believe necessarily that you need to be an elected official before you can make positive changes on things like climate change. I understand as far as getting legislation passed, that's a different discussion, but let's be honest, right? Once you form these kind of positive friendships and relationships in politics, and just as somebody who's been involved, it's much harder to want to put pressure on people, right? Because once you're liked, you don't want to ruin those relationships. So there is a good chance that in Yang's case, skipping the legislature would better benefit him going forward as an executive officer in that regard, because he won't be as likely to try and capitulate to his friends or to his former colleagues or to try to maintain relationships that were never really created. I think that's a huge benefit for Tulsi as well, is that she basically is universally hated by both sides of the establishment, and therefore she has no reason to want to maintain friendships by capitulating to the establishment. But so I agree that experience is good, but I'm a proponent of boasting about the right type of experience, right? Because people get in elected office after just being lawyers their entire lives. And then they're like, oh, put me on the climate change committee. And they're not really gaining they have experience, but is it the right kind of experience? I'm more concerned about conviction, integrity, and your logic and reasoning as to why you want certain things done, and logic and reasoning to the process that you chose, rather than assuming that because somebody hasn't held an elected office, you have to make a lot of, like, depending on what the office is, right? The most important offices or the most important jobs are the ones that you get appointed to for whatever reason, right? But that's when it comes to elected office, it's a different game. Endorsements, lobbying, way too much money involved. And so people capitulate. Whereas being in a position just where either you're like a president or you're appointed, you might have experience, but that experience wasn't enough to necessarily get you elected, but it is enough for you to be damn good at your job. So I do think that both Yang and Bernie are both qualified.
Scott, do you echo Stephanie and Niko? Do you believe Bernie and Tulsi are qualified to lead an effort of a world-scale climate change action?
Oh, absolutely. You know, Bernie's been at this for decades, and I mean, I was on board Team Bernie back in 2016. You know, I really appreciated that he was helping make this part of the discussion, and I know that it's important to him. And when it comes to Tulsi too. As Niko said, I mean, her background is about getting into politics, about climate change and global warming and the importance of the environment. And yeah, I love that to her, she's really about building those relationships overseas, and she's absolutely anti-war. And so, you know, I like that too. And, you know, both of them, they can absolutely, climate change is important to both of them, and they can do it. They can focus on this.
Okay, great. So Stephanie and group, do you have any final thoughts on the environment now that we will be moving on to our next section? Stephanie, do you have any final remarks?
I mean, again, I just think it's great that we even have a whole bunch of progressive choices in this election that we didn't have in previous elections, right? And as a whole, we are committed that, like, we all believe that, yes, there is a climate crisis and emergency, that all of us will act on day one. We will get this, like, moving quickly. We all understand that we have to take on the power structures and the lobbyists. We have to take on foreign policy. So, you know, I think we're in really strong position, again, as a progressive, because eventually as we get down to, like, the two candidates, will basically be a progressive versus a corporate Democrat. And so all of us, that's an important thing, that when we get down to that one progressive candidate, which, you know, we're hoping it will be Bernie Sanders, that we all rally behind him as progressives and go, okay, look, this is the agenda that we want to push through, and we've got to do it now. And so we're committed. And so I think that, you know, bottom line is that, you know, again, Bernie is the progressive who is best positioned to get climate change not only prioritize in our country, but globally, and finally make us a global leader in the effort to stop the climate crisis.
Niko, do you have any final thoughts on the environment and why Tulsi is the most qualified to lead it?
I would want to pivot a little bit. I do believe she's the most qualified to lead it, and I did, you know, lay that out earlier. But I want to say that I think we should take from the example of all three of the candidates. Bernie, you know, as far as his organizing ability, I think that fighting on the ground cannot be underestimated. I don't think that we should be, you know, his motto is not me, but us. And I don't think that we should be waiting on these candidates to start fighting in our local organizations or forming your own organization. You know, Tulsi's example of getting into politics at 18, 19 years old, and then being elected as the youngest to Hawaii state legislature. She's the youngest woman and the youngest person ever. But her just saying, you know what, I understand what the environment means to my generation. I'm in the climate means to my generation, so I'm going to run for office. Yang took a step back from the business world to address, obviously, not only climate change, but climate change is still a huge thing that he's definitely put a lot of thought in. You know, he stepped down from probably a comfortable lifestyle to now be engaged in politics for the first time in a serious way since he started his other businesses. I think that we can learn from all of their examples. And if we have enough people take from all three of their examples, then climate change will be something that we can work together in the long run, and we won't have to rely on one person. The movement will be there. It would just be somebody seeing it through once they get in office.
Great point, Niko. Scott, do you have any final thoughts on the environment and why Yang might be the best one to lead that?
Yeah, so Stephanie said something that I want to go off on a bit here, because she's right. And as far as when it comes to electing people, you know, it's this choice between like centrist and progressive, and it shouldn't be that way. So what I really like about this, when we have like a forum like this, there can be a lot of cross-pollination of ideas, and I think ranked choice voting is way up there as far as an idea that's got to get out there and championed by progressives, because there should be no spoiler effect. We should never feel that we can't vote for the best candidate because of the one we really hate might win. You know, we've got to get rid of that possibility. We should be able to rank our favorite candidate, our second favorite, our third favorite, and put the centrist down at the bottom. You know?
I like that. Yeah.
So I really like that part of the Yang's campaign is pushing for these ideas. It's a campaign of ideas that we can really start to talk about this. Other progressives can get on board with saying like, yeah, this is a good idea. And if we did this, then we could really improve things and we could get things done that we're just not getting done otherwise.
I just want to add real quick on the ranked choice. So we had that in San Francisco, and the recent election for mayor, the two top progressives actually worked together and told voters, like, look, let's get together. You vote us, 1 and 2, and then we'll go from there to defeat the corporate candidate. So that made the election really exciting, because then progressives, just got in like, oh, okay. So like you said, we have choices. We don't have to okay, well, who do I think is the best? We can actually I like, this aspect of this candidate and this aspect, but at the end of the day, a progressive can get into the office. So we just recently had that experience in San Francisco. And what made it interesting again was that nobody expected the two top progressive candidates to work together. And everyone's like, wow, that was really strategy.
And that's, right now we do have the illusion of choice, right? We don't really have, it's like Yang has a large amount of people supporting him. Bernie obviously has a large amount of people supporting him. And if ranked choice voting was a thing in 2016, we may not even be sitting here having this conversation.
Yeah.
We'd be living in some utopia with Bernie, Tulsi, and Nina, and even probably Yang, back in the White House, because he used to work with Obama. And the lack of ranked choice voting is the reason that we're having to have this conversation. So I 100% agree with both of you guys. We need ranked choice voting at a federal level.
Yeah, I certainly agree with all three of you. Ranked choice voting is a huge aspect of how we actually just unite together, because you can't work together on campaigns if one vote for you is a vote that I don't get.
Exactly.
I totally understand it. It is a very high priority. But now I want to transition us into some of the individual questions. So I'm going to be asking each of you a different question from the others, and you can respond to that. So I'll first start with Stephanie. Bernie Sanders does not believe in congressional term limits. Do you believe he is correct?
So this is our personal.
Yeah. Do you believe Bernie Sanders is correct?
I do, because if we had that term limits, we wouldn't have Bernie Sanders today. So he would not be here. And you look at the influence of someone like a Bernie. Another a progressive here from California, Barbara Lee. If we had that rule, Barbara Lee would not be as long, right? She has been a big advocate for no more wars, and she's been a top progressive. So if we had term limits, we would not have excellent people like Bernie and Barbara Lee. So, but then again, I do understand that we also wouldn't have Mitch McConnell to be, being there as long as we are. So, I think, again, it goes back to, the people and who they elect and what impacts election. And again, if we bring up ranked choice voting, this is going to be less of a problem if we can get ranked choice voting. But for now, I don't think one of the interesting ideas that Bernie has with the Supreme Court is that they have lifetime positions. He wants to rotate the judges. So he wants to take them through the appellate court and rotate the judges so we have different judges, which I think is a really clever idea. So
that's sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. That's like weirdly hypocritical of Bernie. That's like surprisingly hypocritical. He's like, I'm great in the Senate, but we need to rotate these judges. I'm just saying.
Well, no, I mean, again, it's just like, I think I don't see how it's hypocritical because you're getting different judges in there, instead of, and they're not elected. I mean, they're chosen by the Senate. I mean, each of the senators still has to run.
Yeah.
The people in the House have to run. So the people can vote them out. We can't vote out a Supreme Court justice.
That's what I think we should be doing. I think we should be voting on Supreme Court justices, FBI directors, CIA directors, et cetera, et cetera. I think that would be a fair way to do it rather than, I do believe in rotating too, but I believe rotation through the democratic process. More democracy, in my opinion, is always the best idea.
Yeah.
So now I want to move on to the individual question for you, Niko. So Tulsi Gabbard has said in the past that she believed that prisoners should not have the right to vote while they're in prison. Do you believe that this should be the case for nonviolent offenders?
So that's a interesting question. I actually did a video about this. No, I don't think that should be the case. But in the context of the prison industrial complex today, I actually kind of agree with her. And here's the reason why. Anybody, because you can be a felon and you can be a non-violent felon, right? In these maximum security prisons, I know we like to think of elections as federal elections and these big presidential, like congressional, senatorial elections. But those aren't the only elections. You have to vote for your alderman, your sheriff, your judge who can have an outcome on your sentence. These things are like especially in small towns where you see the most abuse. These are real life issues. You have to vote for your magistrate. Like these are all real life issues that the system can use to leverage against candidates. And if you've ever been in one of these prisons, and unfortunately I know way too many people that have, they will leverage it. They leverage it all the time for different reasons. They leverage witnesses all the time, not even real witnesses, but, hey, you're going to be a witness in this particular case, or you're going to figure out what happens to you later. Look at what the system is doing to Chelsea Manning right now, just to get her to try and talk about something she's already discussed, to trying to implicate Julian Assange. That's what this whole thing is about right now. They're holding her. We're seeing something unprecedented happen for what? Because the system is currently rigged. And that's the real point that Tulsi made if you watch the entire interview, because she's all about more democracy. Well, she's also about less corruption and less oppression. In our current system, that is the case. Now, if Tulsi wins, she has a huge criminal justice platform. The main part of the platform is completely removing private prisons from the conversation, getting rid of them. And then when we start, because that's a huge part of why we funnel so many people into the prison industrial complex, right? So if we start removing those incentives and we start having a more democratized environment in that regard, I think that we can then reevaluate and say, hey, it's not as bad. We have a better system now, and then we can readdress it at that point. But I think there's just too much corruption within our prison system to have that at the time.
Okay. And now, Scott, Andrew Yang does not support abolishing the Electoral College. Do you believe he is correct?
Yeah, so there's two parts to this. So first of all, his idea is to really spread proportional voting around to all the states. So I think it's only Maine that has proportional electoral voting right now. But this is like for every state, you would have the electors vote according to the vote of the state. And so therefore, the logic goes that this would break through and make it so there's not really like, red states and blue states. You've actually got a mix of everything. And so therefore, you're spreading the importance of campaigning into all the states. And I agree with that, and I like that. The part where I kind of disagree with them actually is just that whereas I agree that that's a good outcome, I really like the interstate compact that exists right now, as far as getting states to change their own way of going about distributing their electors altogether. So it's like a crowdfunding mechanism, where if enough states get together so that they have a total of 270 electoral votes, then they will all distribute their votes according to popular vote, and then they will have effectively a popular vote through the states choosing to do that. And I think that that's a really interesting way to step forwards that. And because already a bunch of states have already signed on, it's actually fairly close, surprisingly close to getting 270 votes. Really a handful more states can do that. But I agree with him too, as well, as far as the looks of this as being like, you can't just abolish the electoral college, because then, if you do that, then there's going to be a lot of people pissed off and feeling that their voting, their importance was removed, that their voice was removed. And so it's tricky to reform to where we are right now to where we need to be to make sure that no citizen is more important than another citizen, and that we open up the country so that so that candidates are actually caring about every single state and not just your swing states, which is how it exists right now. And it's how much of a democracy do we really have when the only states that really importantly matter are these swing states? Like, as someone, I live in Louisiana, this is a hard red state, and it just doesn't matter at all. My vote just does not count. The only way for my vote to count is to do something that will recognize it via popular vote. So even last time around, I voted Green Party because at least I wanted my vote to count for something, because it means that at least Green Party gets funding for the next election around. So we do need to make sure that we reform this. And I like the way that I like his solution, but I also think that there is a midway solution that we could also do at the state level.
Certainly understandable. As someone from New Jersey, I certainly understand that feeling of being disenfranchised from my vote actually mattering, being in very safe blue territory as well. So it goes on both sides. It's not just red states, it's also blue states as well. So now we'll move on to our second universal question for everyone, now on the subject of healthcare. All three of your candidates support Medicare for all, at least in name, and goal of universal coverage. Why do you believe that your candidate's approach is the most effective for delivering Medicare for all? Stephanie, I'll begin with you. Why do you think Bernie's plan is the most effective?
Let's start with the most famous point. He wrote the damn bill, okay? Bernie is like the leader in this, Medicare for all. He has set the tone. If you look at the last two debates, Medicare for all was the first topic that came up, and it was the most talked about topic in both debates. So he has set the lead on this. His policies, he's been doing this for decades. He's rallied other organizations, doctors. The nurses have been a powerful part of the movement in getting Medicare for all. He's got advocates. Again, he's building a coalition and a movement of people, people in the industry, organizations, and again, he wrote the bill, he is setting the precedent, and we have a chance to finally get a single payer healthcare system, which will dramatically help all Americans, because the main point, again, should be emphasized over and over. Every single American will now have healthcare, like everyone. No one will be left out, and no one will have to go bankrupt or declare bankruptcy, right? And go into debt. People are taking out credit cards. I was just reading a tweet last night. This guy was saying someone he knows, his wife committed suicide the other night because she has a chronic illness and she didn't want to burden her husband with the debt of medical bills. That should not happen in the richest country in the United States. And so, we have this industry, the healthcare industry, which is basically just a parasitic industry whose only purpose is to make money off of us, right? So the fact that, we're the only top country in the world that believes that human sickness is a, for-profit opportunity is just immoral and wrong. And we've got to fix this. And so, there's all these components within Medicare for all that again, it just will also free up a lot of people financially, because again, you're not going to have any more co-payments. There's no more deductibles, and the premiums, no more premiums. So one thing that, a point that needs to, be pointed out more is that, when the subject of taxes come up, right? It's like, oh, well, Bernie, and then you're going to raise everybody's taxes, and, I don't want it. So the premiums we pay currently in our health insurance is a form of tax. It's a private tax that goes directly to the health insurance company. So the taxes that you will pay to the government will actually be less than the premiums that you're currently paying into these health insurance companies. And also the Medicare for All system is nonprofit versus the current system, where again, they have to show their shareholders, return on investment year after year. So how are we going to keep making money? And, and it's gotten them into the position where now they are the ones who decide life and death for people. Like, why do we have an industry determining life or death for humans? I mean, Bernie's core thing is that healthcare is a human right, but we have to just you're born onto this planet, and you shouldn't have to worry about going into debt or mortgaging your house just to get healthcare. And then just think about, I mean, as an elder, I look at the millennial generation and think, how many of them don't even go to the dentist, or they see a lump and they're like, well, it's not that big. So, and then they just wait and wait until it's worse, and then Bernie changed the game this weekend, and now, along with cancel student debt, he wants to cancel medical debt, past due medical. So it's just like, wow, now you want to cancel medical debt as well, which again, it's a huge thing. And that the details of that policy will come out later in the month. But, again, he has this belief that, again, healthcare is a human right. We should not be profiting off of human sickness or wellness, right? I mean, it's just look at the whole system. The only purpose for the health insurance industry is to make money off of people. So we've got to change that system and free people to just live and not constantly worry about the healthcare costs, or what it's going to cost just to be healthy.
Certainly a fair point. So Niko, I'd be curious, why do you think Tulsi is the most effective one to deliver Medicare for all?
Okay, so if you don't mind, I want to clear this with Stephanie, because really the only thing we have to go on right now as far as the two legislative candidates are what they have their name on, which is Bernie's Senate bill for him, which he sponsored, and then Jayapal's House bill, which Tulsi worked on and co-sponsored. I just want to make sure that it's okay to talk about that in that framework, if that's okay with Steph.
Yeah, I mean, they have the bills in there.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, because I know it's we don't know which one will end up the right bill by the end of it, but I just wanted to make sure so that it isn't unfair or anything like that. So Tulsi's bill, the Jayapal bill that Tulsi helped worked on, is actually significantly better than the one that's in the Senate, and it has an incredible amount of support, which is why it got out of the House. Now, the biggest part is probably the 2-year transition as compared to the 4-year transition in the Senate version of that bill. Unfortunately, in the Senate version of the bill, we're now operating at a place where we know that it will end up being a larger transition, especially if Bernie Sanders is president. Why? Because Bernie Sanders can't sit on that committee when you have to go through the negotiating process with the House and the Senate, because both bills don't match. So you have to go through a negotiating process through committee. And now there's nobody to advocate for that bill like Bernie would, right? Elizabeth Warren's going to be our advocate. God knows, Lord help us, right? She goes, hey, you have what you want, guys. I'm a fighter, so you can have what you want. Anyway, so with Jayapal's bill and Tulsi's bill, there's a 2-year transition. Much of the Medicare for All bill in the Senate does talk a lot about Medicaid. If you know anything about Medicaid, that is dealt with at the state level. If you know anything about that, and in the ACA or Obamacare, as many people know it as, what is the main problem with Obamacare outside of the mandate? It's the fact that it gets political. Some states refuse to expand Medicaid and then make health insurance completely and totally unaffordable. And then you have states that are quote unquote Democrat states where they want to make Obama look good. So they expanded Medicaid by a lot to make Obamacare more effective in that state. Whereas in Jayapal's bill and Tulsi's bill, it's more geared towards Medicare and a newer version, an updated version of Medicare that is completely different than having Medicaid determine the outcome and determining what gets paid for and what doesn't get paid for and things like that. So I think that is the two biggest differences. Also think once again, it's important to talk about how these things will end up getting passed in the Senate, not the House. The House has enough support already. It's the Senate. As selfish as it might sound, Tulsi in the White House, Bernie in the Senate, Bernie can argue for his legislation more efficaciously in the Senate than he can in the White House because he literally cannot be in that room, which is one of the reasons the ACA ended up being so much different than what Obama literally thought it was when he was telling us about it, because he cannot be in that room as the president because he's not a legislature. So from that perspective, I know that Tulsi has a conviction to fight for her legislation all the way through, not just, you know, some watered down legislation that won't really get the job done. I know that Tulsi has a conviction to veto legislation if it is not good, and will be very forthright about explaining to Americans that lobbyists wrote this legislation. That is not the legislation that I told you I was going to push through, and that's not the legislation we're going to get. I know that she'll do that. And I do know that with Bernie in the Senate, he can be more efficacious there than actually in the White House, because we already have enough support in the House. We do not have enough support in the Senate. He's the only good senator, basically, in the entire Senate. You know, it's sad because Kyle Kulinski and I were talking the other day. He said, you know, it's a sad reality, but, you know, Elizabeth Warren's the second best senator we have. That's saying something. We don't have any fighters in the Senate because of all the lobbying and the lack of ranked choice voting and all the things that we just discussed. But from that perspective, I think if we're talking about pragmatism, not that I'm not saying that Bernie wouldn't fight as, you know, as a president, but I am saying if we're talking pragmatically, we have no fighters in the Senate if he's gone, and we know that Tulsi will fight in that regard. So that's what I think.
So Scott, now I'm curious. Why do you think Andrew Yang?
Are we going to do rebuttals later, or?
Yeah. You'll have a second round.
Okay.
So Scott, why do you believe Andrew Yang is the most effective on delivering Medicare for all?
Yeah, so you know, and unfortunately, that he doesn't have a bill like the other candidates have to talk about. But what I do like about Yang's approach and the ability to possibly pass a Medicare for all, you know, strategy to get us from here to a Medicare for all system is that his whole you know, the movement that he's building is about not left, not right, forward. You're drawing a lot of people who are conservatives, who they voted for Trump. You're drawing people who are independents, and you're drawing people who were never previously engaged in politics. And so along these lines, I'm seeing something that I feel that was similar to Bernie back in 2016, where there's this movement building and there's a lot of support building. And, you know, the goal is for the support to crash down onto Washington, D.C. When he's elected, so as to get things done. And so if he wins, then that means that he's actually been able to mobilize a lot of this energy that wasn't there, and also was even on the other side on Team Trump, or conservatives that didn't care about Trump, but they were still, you know, pushing conservative solutions. So I think that really opens a door that's unique to him. And just one other aside too, I just want to point out that again, he's the universal basic income is so important to our health. 60% of our health outcomes are related to income. So much of what we treat is actually poverty, the effects of poverty, the effects of insecurity and chronic stress and, you know, inequality. All these things have outcomes that drain, that require people to seek healthcare. You know, in Canada, in the experiment in the 70s, that hospitalization utilization rates went down 8.5%. So we can see that with the basic income combined with Medicare for all, that we can actually spend less on Medicare for all and still lead to healthier outcomes, because people won't need as much healthcare as they would otherwise.
Okay, so now Stephanie, I'd love to give you that chance to rebut that you were asking for before.
Okay, so just a couple things on what Niko said. So first of all, something that's very important to point out is that Bernie is working with JFO, right? So these are bills in the House and the Senate that are working together, like we're co-creating. So yes, they have different things in them, but again, it's important that, you know, people know that we're working together. And again, when it gets to, you know, the floor, there's going to be a lot of negotiating, right? Then when we get to the point with all the amendments, right, and all of that, so the negotiating part, like we're starting high, and then let's see what we go from there. I mean, with some of the centrists, they're starting, well, let's start with public option as a pathway, you know, to get to Medicare for all. Well, Bernie is just like, you know, no, we're starting at Medicare for all, and then we're going to go up from there. We're not doing any glide paths onto that. Another thing that's really important that Bernie's been doing is focusing on down ballot races, because again, no president is going to pass their bill until we have a progressive Congress that are all on board for voting for Medicare for all. So, you know, one of the smart things that Bernie did in 2016 was start our revolution. So in under 3 years, they have elected 180 progressives from school board up to Congress. So the down ballot efforts in electing people in the House and the Senate is going to be, you know, really crucial. And that's another, you know, big thing that Bernie has. And yes, you know, we need, you know, he's been the big champion in the Senate. You know, he's not easily replaceable, right? He's unique, you know, in that. But we have a lot of progressives running in the Senate, and that's another big thing, that as progressives, we've got to flip the Senate. You know, Sean King has launched a new organization specifically focused on flipping the Senate, because that is an area, again, if we only keep the House and don't flip the Senate, even if any of our candidates win, like none of them will get anything passed if we still have a Republican Senate. And, you know, something that is important too, you know, to point out is that with Bernie's VP choice, right? So usually you go through this thing where, you know, with the filibuster, so we need 60 votes, right? And so what he's going to do with his vice president is, you know, just get them to, like, okay, instead of going the normal way, what we're going to do is get this passed through the budget reconciliation process, right? Where you only need 51 votes. So again, this comes where, you know, picking a vice president, which Bernie will do, that is very strong on Medicare for all. You know, so those are ways things too. But again, we've also got to focus on the down ballot races. And we've got, you know, our weakest area right now, again, all as progressives, is the Senate. So we've got to get elected, you know, more senators elected in there. And again, for all policies, right? But that is the, you know, besides president, we've got to focus on that Senate and flip the Senate.
So Niko, how would you want to respond to that?
So I'll try to be as concise as possible and respond to both. So as far as Bernie is concerned, he is working with Job Pal, but unfortunately, like, he worked with Job Pal. The Job Pal bill came out first. They had a 2-year transition, mostly focused on Medicare, so that the federal government can pay, so that you're not leaving it up to states to pay, right, the bill at the end of the day. The problem is, even though he worked with Job Pal's bill and Job Pal's bill came out first, we still have the issue that you just brought up. The Senate is more susceptible to lobbying and has less progressives, and therefore we ended up with a 4-year bill in the Senate right now. So if Bernie becomes president, like, that's what basically it's going to, we're not going to know what the Senate is going to look like until Bernie becomes, or until anybody becomes president for that matter. And because of that, if it's Bernie, for example, when we get to the negotiating stage for Medicare for all, he will not be in that room. And therefore, it will be Jayapal and senators, or excuse me, and representatives who have not had that much experience in the negotiating process. Some, unfortunately, that still may be subject to lobbying, like Ro Khanna, for example, who, even though he co-sponsored Medicare for all, he also co-sponsored Medicare for America just 3 months later. So he doesn't even have the conviction that you would like to see in that regard. And so by taking Bernie out of the Senate there, we have a whole different problem on our hands, not only with Medicare for all, but in general. And like just think about it. So say Kamala and Elizabeth Warren stay and they don't win, right? They're still going to be in the Senate, assuming that they rerun. Kamala's plans a 10-year transition. Do you think that her lobbyists are going to let her advocate for Bernie's version, or for their version, or closest thing to their version? You think Elizabeth Warren's lobbyists are going to advocate for Bernie's version, or the closest thing to whatever version they pay her for? Cory Booker, we already know how that game's going to go. So like the people, like the most influential senators are on the debate stage right now, and they are already telling us, even though at first they pretended like they were with Bernie's idea, they are not. They are subject to move the way Bernie pushes them. But as president, unfortunately, the facts of the matter is the Senate in that regard, because it is more domestic and legislative, has more power over Bernie to push him right than he would have in that particular instance to push them left on that particular issue. So that's what I'm going to say to that part. But as far as Yang is concerned, I do believe that Yang does have the capacity to actually bring in a lot of Trump voters. But I do think it needs to be said that I think Tulsi wins this battle 8 out of 10 times. And here's the reason why. We look at people like Lee Stranahan, prominent Trump supporter from Fault Lines on Sputnik Radio, Mike Cernovich, I think everybody knows who he is. Cassandra Fairbanks, also an extremely influential Trump supporter. Shuon Head, another extremely influential former Trump supporter. All these people have either converted completely to Tulsi or leaning Tulsi or pushing her in the Democratic primary. They have millions and millions of Trump supporters between the three of them that are also pro Tulsi. If you go to any Fox News YouTube channel and look at the Tulsi video, nothing but only positive comments. They can't even believe she's a Democrat. Some people don't think she's a Democrat. So given that, I think it has something to do with, like, for example, the way she talks about Medicare for all. The unfortunate truth of the matter is Bernie can be a little misleading when he talks about Medicare for all. He keeps saying that he wants to personally phase out private insurance. Bernie knows as a legislature, it's not what we want to personally do. Yeah, I would love to personally phase out private insurance, but like we have to look at things pragmatically, and we have to look at things the way they are and the way that he wrote the bill, because he did write the damn bill. Well, according to his damn bill allows for private and supplemental health care insurance. That's the way that Tulsi talks about it. It actually leaves more room in his bill than it does in Jayapal's bill, but it's still there nonetheless. People think that that's unimportant when in fact that supplemental private insurance can help cover chiropractor costs. I will say that Yang's plan is actually really good because it actually talks about holistic care and that type of thing, which neither one of the other bills talks about. So, but private insurance or supplemental insurance can now, because they can't make a huge profit off of covering our basic and necessary care, they can start to cover or provide supplemental insurance for holistic care. And these saying, look, we're not getting rid of private insurance, because that's a lie. We're not even phasing out private insurance. It's untrue. Tulsi is doing what she said in her meeting with Omar Omid in New York, where she just said, fuck that shit. Let's just talk about what's real. Because if you speak about what's real, the pragmatism and the idealism tend to fuse, and we get and people can just, they don't think you're selling pie in the sky ideas. They just think you're selling reality. And that's what Tulsi has been. That's how she has that crossover appeal, that where you've seen a lot of the Trump supporters and conservatives just like, look, I may not agree with her on everything, but I mean, this is about as common sense as you can get. And I think that the entire world is just kind of ready for common sense 2020, rather than getting behind a personality or a party. They're just ready for some common sense.
Thanks. So, we'll give you final remarks afterwards, Stephanie. Scott, what's your response to Stephanie as well as Niko? Why do you believe Yang's approach is the most effective to get this done?
Well, they both raise good points, and I would say that I just want to push back against just what Niko said about hands down Tulsi getting more Trump support. Trump voter support. I just personally, I don't see that in the numbers. When you see like polling that shows, who you voted for and then who do you want to vote for, the stronger numbers are for Yang. And although I would say that Tulsi is probably, it's right up there, and actually Bernie is right up there too, depending on which poll that you look at, as far as the amount of former Trump voters that they're able to draw. So, in that case, we're pretty much all supporting candidates who have a strong ability to pull from former Trump voters. But as far as again for Yang's plan versus the others, I still, I guess so. When it comes to the private insurance stuff, it's interesting that Niko was discussing that, because there's definitely confusion along those lines as to far as as are we getting rid of it completely, and are we going to have some kind of supplemental with kind of Cadillac plans for people to have a supplementary? Are we even going to have like really platinum plans that can like help drive R&D forward in the US? And like when it comes to Yang, we know that he's not going to absolutely get rid of your private sector industry. We definitely want to cover everybody, but we also want to continue leveraging the private industry especially for R&D, for able to achieve new technologies. And but we also want to bring costs down, get the pharmaceutical industry under control. Like one detail of this plan I really like is just saying, hey, okay, if first of all, you have to bring your rate down. We're gonna, and all these, this is true with all the Medicare plans, is saying that, okay, we've got to be able to use our bargaining power to drive down prices. But I like how Yang even says that, okay, so if you don't bring your prices down, and if you don't put these within this international window that you charge other countries for these prices, then we're going to just create these publicly. We're going to take that intellectual property and just say, no, I'm sorry, you abused your ability to actually leverage this IP. And so we're just going to create these drugs ourselves now. Sorry. And so I think that it's that kind of thinking, that kind of leveraging private industry to actually do what they should be doing, like kind of this human-centered capitalism approach. That's what I think is really powerful about Yang's approach to this.
I think you made a good point in terms of the actual underlying cost factors. So I want to give everyone first a quick final remark on the subject of Medicare for All before we start talking about how we can actually just lower healthcare costs overall. So Stephanie, do you have any final thoughts you want to add on the topic of Medicare for All?
Yeah, so I just, again, tapping into some of the things that Niko said. So one of the things with Tulsi that has been confusing is that when she has been out talking about Medicare for All and private health insurance, she does not specify supplemental. Like Niko, the way you explained it, like, okay, you were very strong on saying the word supplemental. When she's out there, she doesn't say supplemental. She says people have choice between Medicare for All and their private health insurance. That gets confusing because, again, a lot of the electorate in general doesn't, I mean, they don't know the difference between public option, Medicare for All, the different flavors that are out there. So it's very important that the word supplemental has to be very clear. And that's, again, even among Bernie supporters, one of the top criticisms about the way Tulsi's positioning it is that she's not very clear about the supplemental part. So if she gets clear on that, then okay, right? Because the way you explained it was great, right? And then I also agree with adding on the looking at holistic alternative things, which should be part of like healing that is not even covered at all in our current system. So just to clarify on that. And then in terms of Trump supporters. So the latest Economist YouGov poll actually showed Bernie and Yang getting more of Trump supporters over to their side. So Bernie actually has, is ranking up there in terms of winning over Republicans and Trump supporters. But also something, really big, his Fox town hall that he went on to this day is still the most viewed presidential town hall of this election. And Joe Rogan, I mean, in just a month, it is now it has like 9.5 million views and is the 8th most popular Rogan interview of his whole show. And when you go through the comments, the most common comment in the Rogan thing is that, wow, Bernie doesn't sound as radical and crazy as the mainstream media makes him to be. Like, he makes sense. Like, wow, that was really, I had no idea. And so all these people, again, or even are not, apathetic voters, they're seeing Bernie go on Rogan, which again, a lot of the establishment Dems just, had a problem with that. And they had a really big problem with him going on Fox. But, he's demonstrating that, we have to talk to everybody. We can't act like Republicans don't exist. We can't act like, Trump supporters don't exist. They are. They're part of the country. So again, when Bernie says not me, us, that's what he means, all of us. So he's going where those, you know, people are. I mean, it's something even like more important. Just a recent example, this weekend was the Islamic Society National Convention. Only 2 of the presidential candidates spoke there, Bernie and Castro. And so, you know, all the candidates who were polling at 1% and above were invited, but only Bernie and Castro were there. And so this is another great example of Bernie will go and he will talk to the people where most people, you know, don't. So in terms of like being, you know, the crossover candidate, you know, his policies also address a lot of their pains. But, you know, again, if we just go by like polling and, you know, reactions to things, you know, of him like doing a Fox town hall and then the Joe Rogan interview, which a lot of people have been sharing, and is one of the best decisions that he, you know, has made, you know, and people are sharing this again with voters who are undecided, especially with independents, people who hate Democrats and Republicans, right? That consciousness, that point of view, you know, you get an interview where you just have 2 people just talking about stuff, you know, and even pointing out like that's a much better format than we have with the debates, which, you know, again, it's just it's like this reality TV show just to get, you know, more views on. So, you know, having more substantive, you know, conversations and things like that. And Bernie, again, has been excellent in, you know, being invited to speak to all audiences, and he does as many as possible that he can.
Niko, do you have any quick final remarks on the subject of Medicare for all?
Just a quick response to Stephanie's 2 things. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. So I'm gonna be honest with you. I've worked in the medical insurance industry, so I know the exact language to use, which is why I go out of my way to use it. And recently I've explained this to the campaign. It's like, hey, this is really important. Now, the main issue that I've had is that we can get into the semantics about whether or not she said supplemental, but the problem still remains that a lot of that confusion overall is because Bernie still he did. I won't say he still does, but he did speak for a good 4 or 5 months, using the words, we're going to transition out of private health insurance. We're going to get out of private health insurance. We're not going to have private health insurance. And Tulsi took heat, not because she said private health insurance a private option, but because people thought there was never going to be that. That's why she really took heat. I think that the conversation transitioned into, oh, she means, you know, she should just say supplemental then, but that still doesn't address the issue of why Bernie keeps saying he wants to transition completely out of it and why nobody has ever wanted to deal with that fact. I still think that even though his bill's still great, I still think it's misleading. And that is what causes a lot of the confusion amongst his own supporters, because when you're talking about getting that mandate, if he does win, what happens when supporters find out when he gets in office already that there is going to be private health insurance and that there is going to be this huge transitional period and that the states are going to be in way more control than they originally expected to. I think that's why it's important. And none of the candidates are medical experts, right? So that has a lot to do with it. But I think that that's all things that should be considered. As far as the crossover appeal, and I hear what both of you all are saying. So for Bernie's case, I think it should be understood that the already in place awareness that Bernie has created since 2015 is a huge contributor to the reason that the Joe Rogan interview is so popular. Everybody already knows who he is. They want to hear what he's going to say. They want to hear if anything has changed. He's the first, second or third candidate in every poll. Of course, people are going to want to watch it. Some people are going to watch it and want to make fun of him. Some people are going to want to watch it to make sense of what he's saying. But when you're talking about, did he get anywhere new? We will not know. And the reason I say that, and this goes to both of you all as far as polling is concerned, in order for me to believe polling, Steph, you would have to convince me that you actually believe that Bernie Sanders is less popular than Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, as some of these polls are saying. And then for the Yang gang, I know you don't believe that Yang is at 2 or 3%. I think he's probably actually the 4th or 5th most popular candidate in the race so far. So given that we both understand that, and if you look through the methodology of these polls, the poll that has Elizabeth Warren in second place, my apologies, for example, is a 5.6% margin of error when you can't have a margin of error outside of 4% in any other situation and be taken seriously as a poll. And so, yeah, a lot of the polls are created to favor the establishment. But in cases where the establishment tries to silence progressives, around this time last year, Bernie was still polling at 2 or 3%, despite the fact that he had well over 300 or 400,000 individual donations last election, excuse me. Yang's individual donation contribution shows that he's not at 2%, like some of these polls would like to pretend he is. So I don't think we can go off of raw polling. I do believe, like, when it comes to these conversations, obviously it's semantics. All of them have crossover appeal. I was just trying to argue my point better because I didn't like how Scott came at me like that. No, I'm just kidding. But I do think we have to be, it's like what Scott did say though, corruption of measurements are some of the main problems of our democracy. And that is one of the corrupt measurements that is used to maintain this corrupt democracy.
Good point on that point, Niko. Scott, do you have any final thoughts on the subject of Medicare for all?
Yeah, I just want to stress again the importance of this combination of Medicare for all and universal basic income, because this is something that I feel all candidates need to get on their platforms, because we really do. We treat so much that would not be necessary to treat otherwise. And I mentioned the 8.5% reduction in Canada that was found, but like even the Alaska dividend, it shows that that babies are born healthier with healthier birth weights, and that kind of finding contributes to health throughout life. And also the Alaska dividend itself, $1,000 dividend actually reduces the probability of a child growing up to be obese by 4.5%. And you can see just like effect after effect after effect. People are healthier when actually they've got this secure income, that they're not living in poverty. And to me, it just doesn't make any sense to go around putting out fires and that's it. So like, we need Medicare for all. We need a strong universal healthcare system. But if all we're doing is making sick people, if we're just treating them at the very end and and not avoiding all the sickness to start, then we're just like, piles of money were being spent that just wouldn't be otherwise, and there's so much more suffering and just worse outcomes. So I just want to make sure that people understand that we've got to make sure that we put in a foundational economic floor underneath everybody, and then these systems like Medicare for all actually go a lot further, and the outcomes of health are a lot better.
Yeah, I think that's a very good transition point, Scott, for the next question we have under healthcare, which is really, we can treat it at the end, but how are we actually helping those preventative costs to lower our overall spending on healthcare? So we'll go through a round of that. Stephanie, you want to start us off? What do you think would be some of the solutions Bernie's proposing to really help lower holistically the costs of healthcare?
I mean, when you say holistically, are you talking about holistic health or like the overall, like
the overall picture of health spending?
Oh, well, God, like many things. So hold on a second. So, I mean, so when we get back into the costs, like some of the big things again, is that like no more co-pays, no more deductibles, no more premiums, right? I mean, another big factor is that in favor of Medicare for all versus like public option, is that one of the things in Medicare for all is that there is an out-of-pocket cap on prescription drugs for $200 per year. If you make over $26,000 as a single person or $52,000 as a family. Now, in order for the government to do this, they need a whole pool, right? So they need a bigger pool so they can negotiate, have the negotiating power to do that. But to put a cap on prescription drugs at $200 a year is like a huge cost savings. Because if you look at like type 1 diabetics right now, a lot of them are paying from like $1,100 to $1,300 a month for their insulin, which is one of the reasons that Bernie did that trip with diabetic patients to Canada, where they were able to get insulin for 1/10 the price. So this is another big thing with Medicare for all versus a public option, is that, again, it gives the government this enormous power to negotiate with the pricing. But I mean, to keep you will never spend more than $200 a year on drugs. And so for people with life-threatening, illnesses, again, like type 1 diabetes, that's for life. You have cancer. You have other like life-threatening diseases or rare diseases where, you know, I have a friend who has a rare disease. His insurance company said, well, we're not paying for your medicine anymore. And it's like $2,300 a month for his medicine. And he's like, there's no way. So you're just gonna let me die because you're not gonna pay $2,300. I mean, that's a mortgage on a house, you know, level payment. So
that's a nice ass house.
I mean, not in California, okay?
Oh, okay, yeah, okay, yeah. So, ain't that nice then? Ain't that?
It's like, okay, so, you know, but he, you know, also in Medicare for All, like ambulance, you know, people are taking Lyft and Uber instead of an ambulance because they don't want to deal with the outrageous price, you know, and other built-in things in this are a big thing for like seniors and the disabled is in-home care. Like, so you're going to be able to get people, like someone to come into your house and help you, you know, like with stay-at-home moms, you know, if they're taking care of their mother-in-law, like they have help, you know, there too, or they have a child that's disabled, or they are disabled themselves. That's another huge thing in Medicare for All that's included. That's really underestimated. And for older, you know, for older voters, that's like a, what, really? I can get help? I mean, a lot of them are exhausting their savings because, you know, they're getting health care. And, you know, it also includes reproductive rights. So, you know, women control their body. And you know, the policy will reflect that you women control your body. You decide, you know, what you want to do, and then you will get help from, you know, you will get help for that and healthcare. So, but the big thing is with Medicare for All, we're just, people are not going to have to worry about going into like massive debt and into bankruptcy, and they're not going to. We're no longer. We cannot have the situation where people would rather die than face massive medical bills. Like that has got to end. So, you know, overall with Medicare for All, again, it emphasizes that healthcare is a human right, that everyone is entitled to have, you know, live a healthy, thriving life without fear of going bankrupt or going into major debt, or not being able to afford their medicine and die because the health insurance company won't pay for it.
Yeah, really a difficult choice for anyone out there with health problems to face. So I'd be curious, Niko, what do you think is Tulsi Gabbard's real approach to having overall healthcare spending go down beyond just Medicare for All?
I like what she said during the debate. She said whenever Kamala Harris introduced her Medicare for All plan that had like a 10-year transition, and she revealed that Sibelius, or Sibelius, however you want to call her name, help co-sponsor it, or excuse me, help endorse it and then help work on it. Tulsi made it very clear. This is the same person who literally wrote the ACA. We see how horrible that is. Tulsi made it very clear. We can't have the same approach to healthcare that we've had in the past. In other words, we can't have these lobbyists, these corporate interests being the ones writing the legislation. And once again, we need people who are going to be willing to stand up to those corporate lobbyists and send that legislation right back to the House and to the Senate if it does not happen. Tulsi, like Bernie and like Yang, also want to negotiate prescription drug prices. She did support the legislation that Bernie was introducing that would have allowed America to import prescriptions from other countries, most specifically Canada. There are a plethora of different ways to negotiate, but like I said, her support and co-sponsor and promotion of the move to amend, which would introduce that amendment to remove all big money out of politics, obviously spills over into the medical insurance industry, and that would allow real negotiations to take place. And the beautiful part about Medicare for All, I know that a lot of people are, I'm actually not really all that much for big government either, only in certain situations. And the reason I'm okay with big government Medicare for All is because we know one thing, if nothing else, if the government is footing the bill, they'll get really, really good at negotiating. I guarantee it. If we're footing the bill, they're gonna be like, you know, that insulin medicine can be a little bit higher. But once the government has to pay its fair share, all of a sudden, they're going to get real frugal with that money, I imagine, when it comes to that type of stuff. They're going to start putting they're going to start not necessarily putting the people first. I don't want people to think that would be the incentive, but they will start telling the corporations, look, we know we used to get away with it before, but we weren't footing the bill before. we have to take care of this because lobbying is no longer a major part of this. And we're not getting paid for this. So now we got to do what's best for the people. We're going to lose our office. So I bet they'll get really good at negotiating there. So that move to amendment that would remove all corporate lobbying and big money out of politics that Tulsi did co-sponsor is the biggest part, in my opinion.
Okay. And now, Scott, why do you think Andrew Yang is the best on reducing overall spending on healthcare?
Yeah. So my previous points are still my points that if you have universal basic income, you're going to spend a lot less on healthcare anyway. So that's gonna definitely drive bring the cost down. And also, I already mentioned too his approach to prescription drugs, where we've got to and all of us agree that we've got to make sure that we make that change where the government can negotiate drug prices just like every other government around the world. It's crazy that we don't do that, thanks to lobbyists. And that we use these other methods that can go around that too, saying that, you've got to go within this price point. And if you don't, we're just going to do it ourselves. We're going to take your license and give it to someone else who will do it for the price that we'll do, or even just do it publicly. And also just go after pharmaceutical companies. And there was just a big recent result where someone finally got their comeuppance as far as what they were doing and what their responsibility as part of the opioid crisis was. So we've got to go after these executives and say, look, you can't keep doing what you're doing and continue to not feel anything, just enjoy your golden parachutes and get out and stuff. So I think that I like that part of it as well. And I like this utilization of technologies. We know that prices are related to supply, and that there's just pretty much a broken market when it comes to healthcare, especially in places where what do you got, like one hospital or something, or maybe you're like in a rural area and you're not even close to a hospital. What are your options? So there's a lot of overcharging that can go on there. And so Yang is talking about, hey, let's use technologies to try to reach these rural communities using, say, software like AI or telepresence kind of things, and let's even create like a new license for professionals that aren't like they're below doctors, but they still have the ability to help people in these areas and then direct them to a doctor otherwise. I like this approach of just what can we do, just step after step after step to help bring prices down, expand supply, and all this.
Okay. So as we wrap up now with healthcare, I just want to give you all a quick chance to say any of your last thoughts on the subject of healthcare and why your candidate is the most qualified. Stephanie, any final remarks on that subject?
Well, this is my personal thing. So with Bernie Sanders, this is our last best shot to get Medicare for all, like now. Again, like as Niko mentioned, like Bernie is the biggest, best advocate out there, him as president. Like this is our best shot right now. It's going to be decades. Again, this is my personal belief, before we get anyone who can mobilize not just industry people and fellow advocacy groups, but the American people. Bernie Sanders has that. He's been working on it. He's got the movement right now. So this is it. This is our best, strongest shot right now. So that's why I say, Bernie Sanders for president with Medicare for all, because again, we get the original guy who wrote the bill.
Okay. Niko, any final thoughts on the subject of healthcare for Tulsi Gabbard?
So I have an iPhone XS Max now. I had the very first iPhone. The original iPhone was pioneering. It was trailblazing. But I love my XS Max. It's way better. It took everything the original iPhone had and improved upon it. And that's basically what you get with Tulsi Gabbard when it comes to comparison, at least with Tulsi Gabbard and Bernie Sanders. And it's not necessarily a slight against Bernie, because he is a pioneer and he does have the ability to galvanize that he has worked up for a long time. And I 100% agree there. But as far as the best chance to win or in get Medicare for all passed, I think that it needs to be understood that the roots, not like the routes that we want to acknowledge because it would be best for our candidacy. It won't piss off the Democrats that we may need at the end of the race. It won't piss off the superdelegates that we want to court. No, we need to get to the roots. And one of the things that stops Medicare for all and many of our other domestic policies from getting passed is the inability or the unwillingness to substantively address the military industrial complex, the intelligence community, and all of these different corporations at their roots. That's how we end up with a 4-year transitional period instead of a 2-year transitional period. That's how we end up with Medicaid dealing with paying out, which is at the state level, which we know Republicans are going to use that leverage against Democrats at every step of the way, versus a Medicare at the that will be used at the federal level that will hopefully, well, no, actually it would take the government, state governments out of the equation as far as getting that passed. That is what we need. Like, we get down to the roots of these issues. I think that Tulsi understands things fundamentally and is willing to deal with them fundamentally and also court the public, not insult their intelligence by assuming, hey, we can't, you don't understand how this stuff works, so we won't even talk about the fact that there's private insurance in these bills, even though we all know that there is. Like, she does not insult the public's intelligence, and I think that they greatly value that. I greatly value it because I don't want anybody insulting my intelligence either. I think she shoots straight from the hip. I think that because of that, she courts people from both the left and the right, or anybody in between. And I think that's why it makes her special and uniquely able to get everyone involved when it comes to getting Medicare for all passed, because it can't be left up to one person. It's like Bernie said, it's not him, it's everybody. So technically it would be paradoxical to say that he's the last chance when he himself says it's ultimately up to us anyway.
Okay, and now let's close out. Scott, do you have any final thoughts on the subject of healthcare and why Andrew Yang is most effective to tackle that challenge?
Yeah, actually, I'm just going to carry on in the direction that Niko is just going, because I think that's the track here. Is that, first of all, I think Medicare for all is an inevitability at this point. The American public is not going to stop until we have an actual universal healthcare system. And it's going to be even more important as technology means that we have to decouple our healthcare away from jobs, because the way that we're doing it right now is not working. It's not going to work in this century. It's already not working, but it's only going to get worse. We've got to decouple healthcare. So we're going to do that. The question is, how quickly can we do it, and how good of a plan can we do? What's the best strategy to do that? And again, democracy dollars, I think, is so important to improving democracy to the point where we do listen to voters. Ranked choice voting, we do listen to voters. And if we can improve our democracy, then we will absolutely get Medicare for all. And because it's up to we the people to decide on what we want and the best way to do it, then a strong democracy means that the details that are important for us are going to be included in those plans.
Okay, great. So now we're moving on to our second group of individual questions. This should be fun. It's a surprise for me as well. What we're having here is our representatives are going to be asking each other a question. So the first one we're going to start with is Niko will be asking a question to Stephanie.
Okay. So this is something that's bothered not only Tulsi supporters, but just kind of independents in general. I feel like there's not enough discussion in the Bernie camp or with Bernie Sanders on his very questionable foreign policy pass, because he voted to bomb Gaza not even 3 or 4 years ago. He voted to sanction Iran and Russia. He's obviously talked about the Russiagate, but even in the 90s, I know he talks about not supporting this Iraq war, but he also supported unlimited war in Afghanistan. He supported the first Iraq war in the 90s. And I mean, there's really a laundry list of things. Now, if I go to a job interview and I tell them, hey, look, I know they tell me in the resume or in the application, you got to be able to be a people person, and you also got to be an expert in Microsoft Office. If I go to a job interview and I'm like, look, man, I'm great with people. How are you in Microsoft Office? Well, I'm really so great with people that it doesn't even matter if I know how to use Microsoft Office. They're not even going to give me a call back for a second interview. So if not that he would be bad on foreign policy, but we clearly have an option that can do 100% of the job rather than do 50% of the job really, really well. So why wouldn't we select a person who can do 100% of the job, who aligns with Bernie domestically on 98% of the issues, instead of just going with Bernie, who is 100% great on only 50% of the job?
Well, so first I'll start off with, Bernie Sanders has an 84% rating with the Peace Action West, right? So, and with this, that they gauge, their positions, their voting records on wars, military budgets, and things like that. Bernie has been consistent in wanting to end interventionist regime change wars. He opposed the Vietnam War, he opposed Afghanistan and the Iraq wars. He
didn't oppose Afghanistan. I want to be clear about that. He did not oppose that. That's why he says Iraq, but not Afghanistan. He voted for that one.
Okay, but according to the Peace Action West, it says that he opposed the Afghanistan war, and that's one of the things they gave him a thumbs up for.
Yeah, well, they might have got it wrong. That's okay. They got some stuff wrong about Tulsi too in that. So, and they gave Warren more credit than she deserved. So, but I just want to be clear about that. I went to look it up. That's why I said it. I wouldn't have told you that otherwise.
Okay, well, so he voted no on, a $1 billion arms deal on, to Saudi Arabia in 2016. I mean, he's for withdrawing the troops from Afghanistan and Syria. So, Tulsi is very strong on military and, and foreign policy. And I think with someone like Bernie, again, who has had a consistent record opposing wars. I mean, that's an area that they agree on. I mean, is any candidate going to have perfect records? No, they're not. And is Tulsi stronger in that? So as a cabinet member, she could be like Secretary of Defense. She could be, she can add a lot of things in those areas that really will help us with our foreign policy, with our issues regarding wars, especially, these interventionist wars, which a lot of them, again, are centered around oil, which goes back to the Green New Deal and our action on climate change. So, that's an area, again, where, again, no president is going to be strong on everything. Bernie Sanders, is right now, he's strong in a lot of other areas. And this is where, like, again, strong cabinet members can come in, and help and focus in that area. And I think, like Tulsi would be a great asset on his cabinet.
Thank you for that answer, Stephanie. So I'd like to have you now have the opportunity to ask Scott a question about Andrew Yang.
Okay, so one of my things that I've noticed about with UBI in particular is that there's this discussion versus federal jobs guarantee versus UBI. It's like this either or. Why can't it be like together? Why can't we do both? Why does it have to be this, like it's either this or that? Why can't it be like we can do both?
That's a good question, and I wish that you would ask that to Bernie Sanders.
I'm asking you from because
it is not a dichotomy. There is no reason why we can't do both, and certainly there's arguments, against job guarantee, and I'm not a huge fan of it, but at the same time, I will say that if a universal basic income exists, then it really cuts away a lot of the potential problems that could come out of a job guarantee. So alone, a job guarantee on its own, I am against. I just think that's a bad idea. And I think we're going to get into, in a later segment, more into this. So I don't want to get into that too much. But but if the basic income does exist, then suddenly a lot of these fears that I have are allayed, and it's really more about could it be better? Could we design a job guarantee to be better by changing some details here or there, so that maybe it's not so much a guarantee, but more of let's actually get a lot of these jobs done that aren't being done. So just to simply answer your question, there is no dichotomy. It's not an either or. And both sides can say we can do both. And that's even why my question to Bernie Sanders himself, if I could ask him any question, would be, why do you believe that a basic income is an alternative to a job guarantee instead of something that can exist as a foundation underneath it? It's a good question.
Yeah, that's something I will I can address later. But this is just something that I've noticed just on Twitter. So when you look at the supporters of different, of each of our candidates, the theme tends to come out to be either or, instead of like, well, let's look at both together and, how can they work together? So that's why I was just curious, why does it have to be like either or even raising the minimum wage? Like, why does it have to be one or the other? Why can't they work, if we look at this like abundance consciousness, right? That it's like we establish, a basis level, and then, and then we have UBI on top of that. So I'm just wondering again, just from why there's this, and it could be just simply a communication thing or people not understanding how these things work.
Can I, as a neutral party here, answer that? So the reason why, from what I've seen, because I have a lot of Yang people that are like that follow me, is because they're reacting based off of an interview that I think Bernie did, where he said that the jobs guarantee was like better or something to that degree than UBI, if I'm not mistaken, right, Scott?
Yeah, so he said that. Well, he said that earlier this year, and then essentially he just doubled down on it too.
Yeah, so I think that's where the dichotomy on Twitter is coming from, is because I'll be honest with you, if you're going to do a federal jobs guarantee, I literally do not see a reason why you don't do UBI in that context, because you're already spending the money for a guaranteed income, if you will. And UBI is basically the same thing. And I think, in my humble opinion, when it comes to the federal jobs guarantee, it would probably cost more money than it actually would put back into the economy. Although as a consumer, it would be more beneficial for us. But I still say the same thing about the UBI. Yeah, it may cost a little bit to our GDP temporarily, but I do believe that ultimately it will be beneficial for the consumer. And if it's beneficial for the consumer, eventually it will be beneficial for the overall economy. So I think that's where the dichotomy came from.
Well, but referring to that same interview, so I watched that interview, and her question was, okay, federal jobs program or UBI. His answer was just he prefers the federal jobs program. So he didn't specifically say I'm against it. He just prefers it because that's the policy that he currently has. So I'm just wondering like where the interpretation is that he said that he's against it. He's just looking at now as, we have this climate change problem, and so we need millions of people to get on this. So I don't think
he's against it either. I just think it was just how the Twitter storm does. They take something and they, like I said, you thought that for some, not you, but Bernie people thought that Tulsi was for a public option all of a sudden because she didn't use the word supplemental or because she mentioned private health insurance, when none of these people know anything about healthcare whatsoever, and they don't know what she meant. But people just kind of look for things and fish, and they run with it.
And again, I understand this is part of the issue of when people are politicking on Twitter, right? Especially.
Well, so there's a lot of tribalism involved here too. So if your candidate is for something, then you're going to go after the other candidates who are against for something else, and there's a lot of like you're against it or you're for it. I think that when it comes to Bernie Sanders, like I wish I could get into his mind, and I wish I knew like a very clear answer as to how he feels about basic income, because I've been tracking him for years. I've got an article where I go into each and every time that I know on record that he's been asked about it and what his answers are. And he has never had like a firm, I think this is like a really important idea. He's basically always said that I agree with the goals of basic income, and I think that these other ways do a good job of that. And so I don't think that he really is on board. I can't say for certain, but I just feel that he doesn't really understand the fundamental nature of like this unconditional income. And I worry that he feels that essentially, unless you are doing approved work, or unless you are approved as sufficiently disabled, or unless you are, old enough to in any way, or if you've qualified for welfare, then you're covered without thinking about what conditions cause and how many people slip through that net. And I just wish that he did see that and understand that there's so many people that fall through the net. The net does not work, and these conditions cause problems, and that no one should be in poverty, and not just people who are working, full time. And I think that's a weakness of his stance, is he keeps saying that no one living in poverty, no one working full time should live in poverty. And it's just like, no one should ever live in poverty ever. And that's where we should start from.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point, kind of dissecting this maybe false dichotomy and the reaction that Twitter has had to take small pieces of information and extrapolate much further. And I'd love to get more, as we will in our next section, into this kind of debate between the two programs. But before we do that, I want to give Scott a chance to ask Niko a question about Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah, so I would say I feel I'm in the fortunate position where my candidate has over 100 policies, and it's great that we're able to talk about all these policies. And even then, there are policies that I wish he included into it. So I'm curious if you were to pick out one policy that Tulsi does not currently support, or even is against. Which policy do you feel that she should flip on, or which policy do you think that she's not including that it's important to you?
So the part that we just talked about, as far as, well, first of all, I don't think she's against UBI. I wish she would be more vocally for it. And then her and Yang can actually work together, in that regard, like she does oftentimes with Bernie when it came to things like the Yemen bill and Medicare for all, to get the legislature and then her team to actually start putting this into perspective, and then getting the political scientists and the data people on it, and then we can actually get a bill produced. And I think that actually that'd be beneficial for what Yang is trying to achieve ultimately. It'd be beneficial from Tulsi's candidate perspective, selfishly, but also it would just be beneficial to the entire country, in my humble opinion. But also that holistic medicine portion of Yang's Medicare for all is something that is big for me, because under both Jayapal's bill and Bernie's bill, it does not consider quote unquote holistic medicine as part of the basic coverage that's going to be taken care of. That would fall at the moment under supplementary coverage through private insurance. But I would like to see holistic coverage being covered under Medicare for all, because it's so important, and there is some great work being done out there that I think we're not taking advantage of, and our country is hurting because of it. And I think we would just be all together if we talked more about it. Like Yang does, Marianne Williamson talks about that a lot. And I think that that's something that both Tulsi and Bernie and other candidates like Elizabeth Warren can talk a little bit more about. I think that that's part of it too, is that it doesn't get talked about enough.
Yeah. Good answer there, Niko. So I'd be kind of curious to transition back to the point we were discussing before, now going into our section on the economy. Income inequality is a growing issue in our country as our safety net systems are under attack from Republicans. How do you think we can best establish an economic floor in our country? Is it a full jobs guarantee, a UBI, both, or neither? I'll start again with Stephanie. Do you believe we should have both or one or the other?
So going on the word like holistic. So one of the things that Bernie has proposed, and this is actually the plank of his campaign, is that he's proposed a 21st century economic bill of rights, okay? And what this does is establish a basis level of security for Americans. And so the main things in this economic bill of rights encompasses healthcare for all, education for all, and that includes, from pre-K all the way to college, a job with livable wages, affordable housing, a secure retirement, and a clean environment with water and air. So he's looking at it again as this is his umbrella. This is holistically looking at it, right? Because our system right now is, we have this system of exploitation where the 99% is an economic servitude to the 1% who perpetually get rich off of us at the expense of people, animal, and planet. So what Bernie wants to do is to end this, right? And to create a basis level of security, which is what the economic bill of rights, that is like the foundation that which he is building on, with the economy to transform our economy so it works for the many, not just the few. And then on top of that, he's taking on, all the big special interests. He's taking on the oligarchs, the billionaires. I mean, Bernie has an anti-endorsement list of all the executives and CEOs that don't like him, right? That intentionally want him, they don't want him to be president and stuff. So, we have, again, the most powerful oligarchs, in our country who are fighting very hard, and they the dark money is now starting to come into this race. But man, as we get closer, just watch the dark money start rolling in. They're starting ads now in Iowa attacking Medicare for all. And that's just now. So wait until we get to like December, January, and all the money is going to come in. I mean, here in California, we had a proposition to lower drug prices. Big Pharma came in and spent $131 million on this one proposition. That is like the most spending. So what do you think they're going to spend? They will spend $1 billion or more to defeat a Bernie Sanders candidacy, because again, he's fundamentally wanting to change the system so that it works, for the many, not just for them. So they like the system now because it works for them. So with an economic bill of rights that encompasses, a whole suite of things that again, just allow people to have a basic sense of living. Like we just have like this safety net of like, okay, I can live. I mean, people should not have to work 2 to 3 jobs. They shouldn't have to be worried, making a choice of like, okay, I have cancer. I would rather die than have to pay for like cancer, my cancer bills, or put my loved ones into debt. Like we have so many things that just, from an economic standpoint where, to use a tech example, the operating system of our country is exploitation. Modern capitalism has now gone to the point where now the planet is in trouble. And with the younger generations, they're not seeing any good examples of capitalism, right? Which is why democratic socialism is starting to look more appealing, because it takes more of this, like, looking at, like, again, we as a whole, we as a society. The younger generation, they're the first generations now to have downward mobility versus, their parents and their grandparents. And then on top of the downward economic mobility, they're not going to have a planet that's livable. So you look at a combination of things. And on top of that, it was interesting. Jack Ma and Elon Musk, did this. They had this talk, and their number one concern was population collapse, right? That what's happening is the fertility rates are not above the replacement rates. So, the human population, although, we have projections that it's going up, right? We're expected to be at 10 billion at the, mid-century. But if you're starting to look at the rates now, okay, the people in the childbearing years are not having children at the rates, to keep up with this. So we could have population collapse by the end of this century, right? And this is interesting. There are 2 billionaires, looking, right? And so that's like their perspective. But I mean, you can also look at, well, why? They didn't really get into the answer why. Well, you look at the why. Like, first of all, if we're not even going to have a planet and you guys are not mobilizing, why would I bring children into the scenario where right now the youth, we are leaving them with the burden of the climate emergency? I mean, that's not fair. I see these 16-year-olds, and God bless them, the Sunrise Movement, they're out fighting really hard for a planet. But then part of me is thinking, they should be enjoying their youth. They shouldn't be fighting for the, existential crisis of humanity. So they're out there fighting because the elders are not picking up their thing. And I'm just kind of like, come on, elders, we gotta step, step up here and make these changes. But again, like back to the economics, which again goes back to, if we don't have a planet, then like everything is mute, because then we're just in pure survival mode, just trying to live, right? And or like here in California, we're entering fire season now, and like everyone's anxiety is up because it's like, oh God, like the fires are starting. They're going to be starting soon. So again, when it comes for economic improvement, I think again with Bernie Sanders, where he differentiates from everyone else right now is that he has this 21st century economic bill of rights that gives people a basis level of security and a means to live.
Okay. So before moving on to Niko, I just want to get a quick clarification question. Do you support UBI, a full jobs guarantee, both or neither?
Me or Steph?
No, Stephanie, before I move on to Niko.
Oh, you're asking me? Do I support? I support the concept of UBI, and I've seen different models. What I just have issues with how Yang, his execution plan of it, but I have seen other things, particularly my two big issues, and I'm going to ask my Twitter followers what their issues were, and the two biggest things were, one is that it removes the social safety nets.
That's not true. It doesn't do that.
Can I just finish?
Okay, but it doesn't do that.
Well, yeah, let me. I can finish and you can answer. So it removes the social safety nets, and then the payment of it with the 10% VAT. So that is like, my personal concerns and my Twitter followers too, right? Fellow burners, that they like the concept of UBI because, again, it's this, we're in it together and we all agree that we should have a basis level, of security again. So it could come in the form of, you're getting a $1,000 a month from the government. It could come in other forms, right? I think one of the biggest issues is how it's being executed. So that just, and one last thing with the federal jobs program versus UBI with Bernie Sanders. Again, this is my observation, and because I haven't talked to him about this, but my observation is that he's going with federal jobs program more because of the climate crisis, and that we literally need millions of people to transition our entire energy system over in 10 years. So I think it's more of a time thing, that we literally need tons of people. So let's create like a jobs program that will also guarantee people a livable wage, healthcare, and a level of security.
Okay, thank you for that, Stephanie. Niko, I wanted to get your perspective on this topic. Where do you fall, and where are you hoping that Tulsi Gabbard will fall in regards to a full job guarantee, UBI, both or neither?
Both. That's basically where she stands. And I say both because, for example, the full jobs guarantee, I don't know what we say a living wage, but if the minimum wage is right now is only going to be at 15, that's roughly what I would expect it to be when we're talking about a federal jobs guarantee, because there's no way that they can replicate the current jobs program, federal jobs programs, right? 40, 50, 60, 70,000 a year. And that's not even including GS jobs, which are like the military contracting jobs, which a lot of people have, which are like 80, 100, 120,000 a year. So I think that they'll be working relatively around the $15 an hour wage currently. I like the idea of supplementing that with the UBI. And the reason why is because if like $15 an hour is still poverty, even if you have two people in the household making $15 an hour, yeah, you're a little bit above poverty. But if you have a kid, whoop, there you go, you're impoverished again. So like, it's hard when you're talking about new technology. A lot of people are going to have to be engaged in new education about technology if we're going to, because to my understanding, Bernie's Green New Deal and Tulsi's Off Act both have jobs transition education and to transition them into the new renewable energy, the new jobs to work on the renewable energy sources. Because of that, we can't have them wondering about what's going on at home. We also want to equip people with capital to start saving so that they can start small businesses so they can take advantage of the renewable energy rather than the big corporations taking advantage of it, like we've seen with the marijuana industry. So I think that the combination of both puts the power in the consumer's hands rather than in the big corporations' hands. We don't want to leave anything to chance right now. We have almost 50 to 60 years of repair to the productivity, to the correlation between productivity and income. Right now, it's way too split off, and we need to get that back. And the only way we can do that is by being aggressive, by putting power in the hands of the consumer that we know that has been known, and we will spend money, the middle class, putting that money back into the hands of the rich. They save it, they hoard it. Obviously, we don't want poor people, and so I think the best way to complete that floor would be to have both.
Okay, thank you for that, Niko. So Scott, we all know that you support UBI from your background. Do you also support Andrew Yang adopting a full jobs guarantee as well?
Well, okay, so first of all, I just want to say that this idea of a jobs guarantee without a basic income is extremely problematic. So I just want to get into some of that reasoning. First of all, at a fundamental level, there is one word that separates something like sex from rape, and that word is consent. Consent is an extremely important concept, and consent is not possible as long as someone does not have the power to say no. And the labor market exists in such a way where people do not have the power to say no. If they say no, they know that they can possibly go into poverty, that their families will fall into poverty, that they could go homeless. So you do not, as long as you have no bargaining power through that lack of ability to say no, then wage slavery will continue to exist. And it's interesting, some people really chafe at this idea of wage slavery, but this is even something that Noam Chomsky talks about, and this is something that was really important to the entire labor movement as early as, really decades ago, early last century. And this idea was central, that we should be able to decide what it is that we do for work. And the problem with the job guarantee is that it continues on that. It builds on it. It says that essentially, instead of freedom through the ability to say no, that it's more like a choice of masters, that you can choose to work for this person in this relationship, in this employee-employee relationship, or you can choose this relationship. But what you cannot choose is neither. And that's a big problem, because the neither option also means that we're not recognizing all the work going on right now. Unpaid care work is work, and it makes no sense at all to say that a parent is not doing work, but if the job guarantee program hires that parent to watch someone else's kid, and that kid's parent is hired by the job guarantee system to watch the previous kid, that's jobs and that's work. It doesn't make any sense to do that. We should enable people to pursue unpaid work. We should enable people to pursue part-time jobs. They should be able to start their own businesses at greater rates. Like, we have to be able to give the people the option to do these things. And a job guarantee doesn't do that. And also, there's already a big problem with, if you read David Graeber's work, his book Bullshit Jobs, I highly recommend. And Bullshit Jobs is this idea that there's already so much work going on right now that's entirely useless. It's unnecessary. It's like we're creating these jobs simply because we need the income, and not because the jobs actually have to exist. So if you create a job guarantee, that doesn't do anything for the bullshit jobs. I mean, you will have some people in a position to go from a job that they think is useless to something that they think matters. But also, if say you're earning $60K doing something useless, and a job guarantee is offering $30K, are you really going to do that, or are you just going to keep doing your unnecessary job? So David Graeber concludes at the end of this that really the only way to get around this is to actually introduce an unconditional basic income, because then people can actually say, hey, this work is unnecessary. My basics are met. I can actually now choose what work is actually matters to me. And so to go back to the question of if I support a job guarantee in addition, I don't like and I don't support a job guarantee. And the guarantee part is what gets me, because I've looked at the evidence from other places where, like, the guarantee stuff. I think a good example, like effectively Saudi Arabia has a job guarantee, I feel, because there's this massive portion, I think it's 70% of people are employed by the government there. And you've got people who are just leaving their jobs early because who cares? And the private sector has a really difficult issue getting people to actually do these better jobs and better actually doing something, because people have these like nice cushy jobs. They don't have to worry about being fired. It's like lifetime stuff. So there's a lot of issues that come out of this, like, let's create infinite jobs. But I absolutely am for, especially when it comes to a Green New Deal, and this, there's a lot of stuff we need to do quickly. Let's actually create a bunch of jobs with specific tasks in mind. Let's actually complete these things. Like, there's a big difference, I feel, between saying, let's build 5 bridges and let's create 10,000 jobs. Like, if your goal is jobs, your goal is not necessarily the completion of these tasks we need to make. And so I think it's even more important that we say, no, we need to do this, 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 and this. And here's the best way to accomplish that with this many employees and using even this technology. And then we can actually get this stuff done. So I would like to see like the Green New Deal take this on, or Yang add this to, just saying that, yeah, let's do a bunch of jobs, and these are what should be done. But I don't like the idea of infinite work. I think we have to get away from that. I think we have to focus more on what's important to us as human beings. We need more time. We need to get back to reducing the work week, because it's ridiculous that we stopped at 40 hours when we used to, work 60 hours and 50 hours. Let's keep going down. Let's leverage technology so that we're working 30 hours and 20 hours. Let's take back our time and our power. And that's why I'm such an advocate of basic income.
Okay, thank you for that, Scott. Stephanie, would you like to offer your rebuttal?
Yeah, so one thing, so Scott, like I get you're really passionate about UBI, but this is a piece of advice for you. Please don't ever use like an example of rape when you're talking about this. So I'm a survivor, and listening to you use that as an example immediately turns me off. And if you're gonna try and win women voters over, if you're using examples like that, that just immediately turns them off. So this is just some advice from me to you in your messaging. Just please don't use terminology like that, okay? You can find a much better example, because right now, like again, I'm sitting here as a survivor listening to this, and I don't, part of me doesn't want to listen to you anymore just because you started off with this. So this could happen to you with other people, but I'm just saying, when you're talking to an audience primarily with women, if you want women on board, find a better example. So in terms of like the federal jobs program, so besides the Green New Deal and adding like, needing a workforce again to quickly transform our energy system over, this includes also fixing our crumbling infrastructure. And one of the biggest problems that we have right now is our water system, right? Flint still does not have clean water. So we've got to, entirely, we have to replace our infrastructure, including our water, but also, and Bernie mentioned this yesterday in his talk at ISNA last night, is that we also need to build affordable housing, because a big problem that's happening in big urban cities is gentrification. In San Francisco, we have a great example of how there are more luxury high-rises going up than affordable housing for people to live. So you have, and even just to give you an example of the income, level of income inequality, the 1% in San Francisco has 44 times more wealth than everybody else in the city. And so when people ask, it's like, we also have the highest concentration of billionaires and 100 millionaires. And we also have one of the worst like homeless problems. And you would think like, well, given all these millionaires and billionaires, why do you have such a high homeless rate? And a big issue of that is because, again, follow the money. Where does the money and the influence goes? And it's going to building these high-rise buildings, and then build around that, building all these like, eateries and foods, basically to cater to the lifestyles of the affluent, right? The people who are making over $150,000 a year, who can afford to eat avocado toast all the time, right? Have champagne. So like and they're driving Teslas around. So we have this thing, and then you have the people who, have to that work in the hotels, that clean the hotels, that pick up the garbage, that teach our kids. They can't live in San Francisco. The median rate for an apartment in San Francisco is $3,700. That's median. That's not the high end, right? So, the working class people cannot live in cities like that. And a big reason for that was the tech boom. So again, in terms of looking at solutions. So again, that's where, again, I'm open to the idea of like UBI, because again, like the playing field is not equal, right? It's not the same. And so, having this in a combination with giving people like jobs and a sense of security. So that's another thing with a jobs program, is that, to be an entrepreneur, and I do, we're all examples of, living from our heart, go for the dream. but it also takes a certain personality. You got to constantly hustle. You have to have like, be tolerant to high risk. You've got to be able to just, be on the go. I mean, having been a startup founder in Silicon Valley, I mean, the level of resilience you need to be a founder, in tech is like, enormous. And a lot of people leave just because the things that are needed there. So, UBI is great for those who want to pursue their dream, coupled with Medicare for All, which unhinges you from an employer. So you can go out and go, do your dream job and also hire talent, because that's another thing that prevents people from hiring is not being able to offer, health insurance. So, again, there's some people who maybe are just not cut out to be entrepreneurs, and they like the security of having a 9-to-5 whatever job with a secure paycheck and healthcare benefits. It makes them feel more secure about having kids, buying a house. And, when you're applying for loans, they ask you that stuff, right? So as an entrepreneur, they ask you for like your backup income. So if you don't have anything that looks secure enough, you're not getting a loan for a house and stuff like that. So again, if you have a combination of both, you get the security plus a UBI, that would be an ideal thing and help, equaling the playing field a little bit more.
Okay, thank you for that response, Stephanie. So Niko, I'd be curious, why do you believe Bernie Sanders is wrong to not have a UBI, and why do you think Andrew Yang is wrong for not having a full job guarantee?
So I think that Bernie is wrong for not having a UBI on his platform because, when we're talking about the root, the source of a lot of the issues that we have today, which he does acknowledge is the strife that we go through, the poverty that we lived in, the stress that comes with that. You can't take options off the table in that regard. So we all, I don't think that Scott disagrees with the federal jobs guarantee. I can't really remember if Yang disagrees with it. Scott, do you know?
Oh, well, he just says basically what I said as far as like, let's invest in jobs. Let's do that.
So okay, got you. Okay, so, but given the option, he just prefers UBI, but he's not against necessarily a federal jobs guarantee, overall, just basically is what you're saying?
No, it's the same way, like I'm against the guarantee and he's against the guarantee, but it's the way that we're defining what a job guarantee is, because I know there's actually a lot of debate there too.
That's another thing, which is, I get that. I don't want to go into that right now, but,
right.
But yeah, so I'm not for Bernie necessarily taking options off the table. When we're talking about an economic bill of rights, in my opinion, the ability to choose your job, to choose how you want to contribute to society, is a right, and a huge, the people who get to do that the most. You see these CEOs literally go from different boards every 2 years because they have so much money. They can look at their board members, I'm out. And they will get picked up like that because of all the experience they gather. But where's the root of that? Once again, the security. And so I think that's why it's important to not take options like UBI off the table. So as far as not supporting a federal jobs guarantee, I do agree that there needs to be a better, a more flushed out definition of what that would look like. I went to Bernie's website to try and figure it out, but it just says federal jobs guarantee. So I would like to know what that looks like. Now, I think that we cannot underestimate how much people want to feel like they're contributing to society. Not everybody wants to be a business owner. Not everybody wants to sit at home either. I think making sure that people, and that oftentimes contributes to their mental state, if they feel useful to society. And so a lot of people don't want to sit at home. And so we have to make sure, in my opinion, that we should be putting them in positions to succeed and work, once again, where they want to work. And that's where UBI kicks in. Just because it's a federal jobs guarantee, you can stay there for 4 months, but because of your security of UBI, if you don't like it, you can just get out and look for another job in the private insurance industry, which is why I think that they work together. And I think that both Scott and Stephanie bring up brilliant points to both of their points. They bring up brilliant points. All those things are true, which is why I think we can't take options off the table in that regard.
Okay, thank you, Niko. So Scott, would you like to offer your rebuttal to Stephanie and Niko?
Yeah, so I guess just first to Stephanie, obviously, I hate that what happened to you, and I hate that it happens to anyone, and I hate what's happening on a daily basis to women and men all over the world. And I hate how we created a system where, and this goes all the way back to the system of the invention of private property itself. We created a system where we took what was accessible to everyone and we enclosed it, we locked it away, and we said, okay, here, the owner class, this is yours. Then they have that. And then they said, okay, we will let you earn what you need to live if you do what we want. We have been in this non-consensual, this position of just domination since the very beginning. And this is why it's a human right. We as humans have a human right to life. This was even part of what we founded our country upon. And part of this founding, if you have the right to life, that means people cannot stand between you and what you need to live to exist. And so this is why I wish that Bernie saw it in these terms and said, we should not put conditions on the stuff that you need to live. If whatever you need to live, we need food, we need homes, and yes, we need healthcare. Healthcare is a human right too. We need these absolute basic needs, and they must be unconditional. We cannot say that only if you do this or this or this, then we will grant you what you need to live. So I feel very passionately about this, and I'm sorry if that upset you. And I just feel that this is just such a big deal to me. And I wish that people saw it in these like very stark human rights, human justice, economic justice terms, because we cannot have social justice without economic justice, as long as we have a monetary system that says that you need money to live. So I just want to make sure that everyone has unconditionally enough money to live. And then so much of the other things, we actually do a redistribution of power. People have the ability to no longer be dominated by others who would otherwise dominate them. And we can actually really improve and move the world forward.
Thank you.
Well, and thank you for that. You know, I appreciate that. And you know what? That was much better than the way you started. So and with this, I mean, you could really tell, again, we know you're very passionate about that. But again, like when referring back to like Twitter and how people interpret things, again, when they grab onto certain words. And so again, just as a fellow progressive, for you to sell this narrative, I just wanted to be very clear to you, like, just please don't use that example. What you just said now was great. So go more with that. And then, you know, going with this basic, like, okay, we're looking here, again, and that's the message I think for all of our candidates, right? We want to uplift humanity. We realize we're all in this together. So, you know, we have different ideas of how we get there, but we all have the same goal. But I think, again, focusing on you know, again, a message and looking at things from a higher level of consciousness, because again, as progressives too, that's an advantage we have over the Republicans. We're looking at the world and the higher good of all, versus like, okay, what can our donors get? Like, what can, you know, this rugged individualism that the Republican worldview tends to be. And so with the younger generations who don't vote, you know, and a big reason is because they're just turned off by the two-party system and all the politics and the hatred and how it just gets so mean, you know. And one of the reasons Bernie resonates so well with the younger generations is because he talks about in terms of unity consciousness, and that it's not me, it's us. It's a we, not a me, right? You just turn one letter upside down, it's a whole different, you know, perspective. So again, you know, I mean, for all of us, it's just when we're communicating, and that's a big thing that I've had to learn just going out representing Bernie, is the narrative and the words that I've been using. And so on one hand, Twitter is great for that, right? And or discussions like this where we bring up ideas and talk about things, and we see how the narrative works or doesn't work, right? And how we can improve upon that. So again, you know, so just to end on that point, like I'm glad we're having this, you know, discussion where we see, like, again, we're all progressives, but we all like have this goal of like, how can we achieve a higher good for all and transform the country so it works for all of us, not just a few.
Yeah, I kind of want to like build off this topic of going between these job guarantee and a UBI and trying to focus on now the actual minimum wage portion of it. So on a federal level, we've had two of the candidates, both Tulsi as well as Bernie Sanders, say that they would like to increase the minimum wage on a federal level to $15 an hour. Well, Andrew Yang has said that he would like to see it get to $15 an hour, but he would like to leave it to a state level. So I would like to start with Stephanie. Why do you believe that we should be implementing a $15 minimum wage on the federal level?
Well, I don't think it's a question of if, it's already happening. So the House just passed raising the minimum to $15 an hour. Mitch McConnell is being an obstructionist and won't even put it on the floor. So we've got like the entire Democratic Party is on board to raise it to $15 an hour. I mean, 7 states have already done it, 40 cities, have done it. It's on its way. But I think the big thing is it's already passed the House. So once we get in a Democratic Senate and a Democratic president, because again, even the establishment people are on board. So, I mean, you got them on board, like this thing is a done deal. So with, we have a President Sanders and we flip the Senate. I mean, I would not be surprised if $15 an hour gets passed in his first 30 days, if not 100.
Okay. So, Niko, why do you believe we need to be addressing this issue on a federal level?
Because the states have already proven that they, so for example, I know you all are familiar with HB2, which was the quote unquote bathroom bill in North Carolina. It wasn't really a bathroom bill. That's how they marketed it, and that's how the evangelicals sold it to their people. But what it was actually created to do was to limit Charlotte from raising its minimum wage proportionate to its municipality cost of living. And because that would have then made other business owners have to compete, or else people would leave Raleigh, which is primarily Republican, and move to Charlotte, which is primarily Democrat. When the state gets involved, especially when it's lobbyist-owned Republicans or lobbyist-owned centrist Democrats, they mess things up because they're incentivized to. They're a little bit, they can easily fly under the radar. They've been known to. And once again, you see the way they market these bills to deceive people. The same thing happened in, I want to say, Missouri. I think it happened in St. Louis, Missouri. Same thing. They passed legislation to prevent the economy from determining the minimum wage. And so when we have a situation like that, the only thing that I believe the federal government should be involved in is when it comes to protecting our rights rather than infringing upon them. And I believe that a living wage is a right. And I believe that in that particular instance, we have to have the federal government step in, because the states, this isn't me just assuming, the states have already proven that they're not going to do the right thing if it's left up to them, whether that comes to something like minimum wage or whether it comes to something like expanding Medicaid appropriately so that our most vulnerable can take advantage of it. In both instances, and just about in just about every other instance, I mean, literally, we can look back to slavery. When we're having the arguments about states' rights, that's just a simple dog whistle. States have always been known to infringe upon rights rather than grant more rights. Although the states' rights, according to the Constitution, states can only really grant more rights. They're not supposed to be able to take rights away from others.
Hey, thank you, Niko. So, Scott, Andrew Yang has on a couple occasions said that he is not for raising the minimum wage on a federal level, but he would like to see it get to $15 an hour, and he would like to do it on a state level. Do you believe he is correct with that approach?
Yeah. So, and I could go either way on this too, actually, personally. I think that this is a discussion that we need to have as far as, this being an either or thing, as far as, should we have just basic income or should we have basic income minimum wage? And obviously, I don't think that we should have only minimum wage. I think that, again, doesn't address all these other issues. But we certainly can go with both as we go into the future. And the question is, what is our goal that we're looking for? So I just want to point out that for those who don't really know why we should have basic income, and especially if you're comparing it to $15 minimum wage, the basic income is actually, it functions as like a $12 an hour raise for those working 20-hour weeks, and like a $6 an hour raised for those working full-time 40-hour weeks. So already, unless you're working, if you're right now earning less than $9 an hour and you're working full-time, then you could be better off with a minimum wage, at least somewhat temporarily from a purely financial perspective. But of course, what you're not going to have is your increased bargaining power. You're not going to have this basic income that follows you for your entire life versus just this like one instance of this job. So that's one important thing to understand. Another thing important to understand too is that you do have different effects, especially versus urban areas versus rural areas, especially versus big corporations versus small businesses. So if you do a $15 minimum wage, that is going to have different effects based on the location or the business in question. So a business like Walmart or something, you know, they can do that. They've got tons of profit. They can choose to pass on if they want to, or they can take out their profits. They're fine. But when it comes to, say, a small business, especially like in a rural area, that could just completely, they would have to jack up their prices and in order to pass on or to afford it, and that could actually end up with them, you know, closing down. And then, of course, you don't have that job at all anymore. And so it's a legitimate point to make that the conservatives do make. I think they overmake it as far as the job loss being like a thing that always happens no matter what. Because it really does depend. You can actually increase demand through a higher minimum wage and then having local effects such that that does actually push up the demand. You'd be able to afford it. You can actually not lose those jobs. But in other instances, that does happen. So it's just important to recognize that there are people who will not be able to stay in business with that, but they can with a basic income, because the basic income, they're not the ones paying for it. This is covered at the federal level, and it's creating a floor so that now someone earning, you know, $10 an hour right now is effectively earning $16 an hour with a, you know, with the basic income. And also basic income, of course, you're going to be affecting all those people who earn more than $15 an hour right now, and the minimum wage doesn't help them. And you're not helping any volunteer workers. You're not helping unpaid care workers. You know, their work is still going unrecognized with a $50 minimum wage. So it's important, absolutely, if you support minimum wage, to make sure that you support basic income in addition to it. But it doesn't have to be that, you know, it's not a mandatory choice. The reason I say it's a choice is that as we go into the future, we can choose, like, what is important to us. Is it important to us that everyone be employed in some way? And therefore we want to, like, essentially subsidize labor so that people can actually choose which jobs that they're working and be more employed. Because obviously, if you can have, you know, two people working $7.50 an hour instead of $50 an hour, and so therefore you can employ more people, you can have more part-time work. So it's really like an option of what is important to us, maximizing work or not. And also in terms of automation, it's definitely going to be a part of this discussion, because traditionally speaking, you know, technology will always get cheaper over time, and human labor will always get more expensive. So right now we're already at the point where, let's say, a robot to take a job is $14 an hour. And so like right now, it doesn't make any sense to automate. But if you go up to above $14 an hour, then it does make sense to automate that job. So you can actually accelerate automation through a higher minimum wage, which could be a good thing as long as we have a rising basic income floor. But if we don't, then if we just have a minimum wage and combined with automation, we could just actually accelerate people being thrown out of work.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Stephanie, would you like to offer your rebuttal on why we should do this on a federal level?
You went out there for again.
Okay, let me repeat that. So you want to offer your rebuttal on why we need to do that on a federal level?
To
raise the minimum wage on a federal level?
Because again, well, first of all, the federal minimum wage hasn't been raised in 10 years. It hasn't taken in consider inflation. There are 16 states that have the minimum wage still at $7 and $7.25, right? So they're making like $15,000 a year. We raised it to 15. Now they're making 31,000. So you're more than doubling like what you get. And even if you go from 10 to 15, you're getting like $10,000 more a year. So when people are getting more money, like, that stimulates the economy, right? But it just moves people up to a point where they can just live and not have to, have 2 or 3 jobs. In some places, like here in San Francisco, like our minimum wage should be more like $20 to $25 an hour, right? So 15 for us is like, okay, well, that makes it less worse, so, and people are commuting in like an hour in, and they're renting, they're not buying homes, right? So in other areas, when you're, basically doubling your income, that's like, huge help right there. So I think, again, just at a federal country level, it brings up the standard of living and puts more money into the economy. And we have this thing, right? The velocity of money, because people who are making less than the than the 1%, they put more money into the economy faster than the wealthy do. So we get more people who have more money that they can actually spend and not just survive. Then that helps boost the economy. But, a great sign, just the fact that the House, everyone in the Democratic Party agrees, okay, $15 an hour, and they made it happen. So it's happening.
Okay. So Niko, you had raised your hand before when Scott was making one of his points. Is there something you wanted to bring up as rebuttal?
Well, yeah. So basically, once again, I agree that UBI needs to be a huge part of our economy. But I do think it's important as an issue that is even conjoined with UBI as far as setting the economic floor, to recognize there are huge issues with leaving the states to determine minimum wage. So, for example, this point that Scott made about businesses not being able to stay open if they have to pay their employees X minimum wage. That point is true, but it is only true in our current economy with our current wages. Because if one city, Seattle in Washington, raises this minimum wage to $15 an hour, for example, or even $20 an hour, yeah, that could be problematic, because this person from right outside of the town only making $8 or $9 an hour all of a sudden can't spend his money at that small business or her money at that small business. However, if we have a federal minimum wage, we're all making that transition. The consumer's buying power is simultaneously increasing. And so when you can join that once again with UBI, all of a sudden, all of the power is being kept in the consumer's hands. And now you're balancing the prices. Why? Because yeah, Amazon before could beat out these small businesses by selling what they sell at a cheaper rate. But if I have a choice to walk to my small business because I have more money right down the street rather than waiting 2 or 3 days from Amazon, and I have a better relationship with these people, I'll spend my money there. If more people are making that decision because of convenience, that will lead to them making more money. They can hire employees and keep them on staff, and then it rolls downhill from there. That is the why we need federal minimum wage rather than the states, because the truth is the reason the Republicans push the quote unquote state thing is because, they push the states' rights argument when it comes to minimum wage is specifically because they want the outcomes that keep happening in some instances, at least in the first couple of years, when it comes to raising the minimum wage. If Seattle raises it, that is not all of Washington. If LA raises it or San Francisco raises it, that is not all of California. So you create micro issues because they are exercising something that we all want, but they're exercising it in a vacuum. It has its own economic ecosystem that isn't comparable to North Carolina or comparable to Florida, for example. So if you make a federal minimum wage, like Stephanie just said, San Francisco, all of a sudden, everybody in the country is making $15 an hour. So that shifts industries, gives you more mobility. If I want to leave Florida to move to South Carolina, I'm not taking too big of an economic hit, or leave Florida to go to California. It won't be that much. And I know that once I get there, I'll be making at least as much. And I can build upon that. San Francisco, obviously, they can, based off of their economy, they'll probably make it $20 an hour, $21 an hour, like they have been known to do in the past. Same thing with LA and Southern California. So like when you have universal competition rather than just competition at the state level where corporations levy that to their advantage, you have universal competition, because at the end of the day, in my humble opinion, it's not about the money. The Walden family has more money than they know what they can do with, right? Let's be honest. They could easily raise their minimum wage, and guess where their employees would spend their money? The proof has been in the pudding. They will spend most of their money back in Walmart, whether it be through electronics or through groceries. So why don't the Walden family just give them more money to spend? Because it's not about money. It's about equity of opportunity. And that's what the federal minimum wage and combined with the UBI gives us. Equity of opportunity of mobility, equity of opportunity of choice. That is what the combination of both at the federal level gives us, because once again, the states have only been known to restrict rights more than they've been known to grant them.
Hey, John, is it okay? Do we have time? Can I ask Scott like a quick education question about like
Sure.
UBI and how it's paid for? Okay, Scott. So I brought up earlier, one of the issues with UBI and Yang's UBI is the payment of it, right? So his current plan is to do a 10% VAT tax, okay? And so some people have problems with that because they see it as regressive. Some people see it as, for example, in France, they just tried they enacted a 3% tax on big tech. And what Amazon did in return is raise the seller rates by 3%. So they're like, okay, well, you raised us, you're making us pay 3% government, then we're just gonna make our sellers pay for that. So when I was doing research about UBI and payments, and different, like how to pay for UBI. So two interesting things that I saw. And again, I just wanted to ask you, because this is looking at paying for UBI in a different way beyond the VAT tax. So here in California, UBI was actually put on the California Democratic Party platform last year, which was pretty amazing, right? And then we have the mayor of Stockton, who they're doing a pilot UBI program as we speak, right? I think they're going to end it at the end of the year, so we'll have data on that. But one of the things, there was a bill, State Senator Wachowski, I didn't pronounce that right. So he put in a bill. So we have cap and trade here in California. So in his bill, he included a climate dividend as a way to be a potential source for basic income for people here in California. So so there was one model where instead of tying it to taxing tech companies, well, okay, let's tie it to cap and trade programs, right? So I thought that was really interesting. It didn't pass, but it's like it got people like thinking and talking. Another interesting idea that I saw was, okay, so with automation we have taking over, and technologies as we advance in the 21st century. So the way I see it, like we're going to be moving to digital currency by the end of the century, going to the next century, right? So the way we look at money, like we're not going to be printing paper dollars and coins anymore. We're going to be moving to cryptocurrencies, different types of digital money, so to speak. So another interesting model I saw was paying for UBI by putting small transaction fees on cryptocurrency exchanges, right? Because right now we have like if you just look at crypto, there's 5 top ones, right? Bitcoin being the biggest one, you have Ethereum, but our whole money system is also changing. So coupled with innovation and moving to this new money system, and the basis of cryptocurrency is also like decentralizing, taking power away from the banks, but that we agree that we're going to have a different view of money. And next year.
Steph, hold on, I might be lost really quick. Are you asking him about like the VAT tax, or whether or not like Yang would consider like another option to pay for it?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. This is two interesting things. So since we have the UBI expert, I just like wanted to ask, like these were 2 different models of paying for UBI that I saw. So I just wanted to get his thoughts, and also so he can explain to like, I mean, does it have to be Yang's 10%, or are there other models, which I have found? I think the cryptocurrency one is really interesting because it goes again with the same philosophy of if we build into the crypto system, which is new, and a lot of the crypto developers are supportive of UBI, and we look at Facebook. Facebook is launching their own, currency, Libra, next year. And So, and he's already said that he's for UBI. So why not like do a test with Facebook and Libra and see if they will integrate it and do some form of UBI using Libra? Like that would be a great pilot program showing how we can raise, money to pay for UBI using technology, but working with the technology companies instead of taxing them. But again, as we move to, a whole new money system with digital currency. So I just, again, since you're the expert on this.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, first of all, the Libra thing would be really interesting as a side note, just because Zuckerberg is for UBI, so it'd be putting his money where his mouth is. He was like, hey, yeah, Facebook is implementing a small UBI. It wouldn't be a full UBI, but it'd be like essentially a digital dividend or that kind of thing.
Like we're trying.
Yeah. But so to go back to start off with that, there's a misunderstanding here that exists in a vacuum. So I guess one way of understanding this is that if I give you $100 and ask for $10 back, then that's essentially the same thing as just giving you $90. So there's that back and forth. And what the people who are saying it's regressive is saying that I charged you $10, so therefore it's regressive. It's a regressive tax on the $100. But it's the exact same thing as giving you 90 and asking for 0 back. So you can't look at this in a vacuum. You have to understand that if you have to add the tax and the outcome. So it's the same thing with carbon tax and dividend, actually, where a carbon tax is a regressive tax. It's going to affect people who are poor the most. But if you take that revenue and then distribute it to everyone universally as a dividend, then those at the bottom are actually receiving more in income than they're actually paying in additional taxes. So therefore, you've actually transferred spending power and income from the top to the bottom and middle. So when it comes to it's not just a VAT tax. Like the rest of the world has a VAT tax, and those are regressive because they're not ending the regressivity. They can try to by saying, all right, we're not going to put a tax on, say, foods and these kind of essentials, and instead we're going to put it more on luxuries and this kind of thing. That's how they try to make it non-regressive. But if you actually fund a basic income with this, then the outcome is progressive. You are increasing the total incomes of those at the bottom far more than you are at those at the top, because the top are even spending more into the new tax than they are receiving. So it's actually they're ending up with less income, and the bottom is getting at the most bulk of the new income, and the middle is actually getting more, but not as much as the bottom, and of course less than the top. So all this together, the outcome is progressive, and I wish that's what people would focus on, because it's the same thing as the carbon dividend as well. As far as these other ways of paying for it, there's absolutely a lot of ways to pay for it, and I love that it's even part of the discussion, and I hope that this builds into the discussion of saying that, yeah, let's do a basic income. What's the best way to do it, and what are even lots of ways to do it to make like a higher basic income? What can we do? So I see this, and I know that Yang sees it this way too, where the freedom dividends as $1,000 a month is a starting point. It's saying that this is where we're creating the floor, and over time, let's raise that. Especially as automation increases, let's raise that, and let's figure out other ways of putting into this and to make it bigger. And even like when you're talking about the kind of cryptocurrency things, like this is even getting at what the concept of money is. And that's a really good conversation to have too, because it's one thing to even look at cryptocurrencies as this new way, but also it can make us look at the old way. We can say, look, why is it that our monetary supply increases based on the debt that is distributed, by banks? Like that's the way that that's the way we're inflating our money supply now, because it's all privately controlled. It's just weird that we, the citizens, have provided the power to create our money supply to private banks. So why do that? Let's actually just say, hey, if we're going to increase the money supply because GDP is growing and that's what makes sense to do, then let's create that money individually to everybody out of credit. So we could actually do that and say, hey, instead of $1,000 a month basic income, we can actually just do $100 a month that's just created new money, that's sovereign currency, that's not created out of debt. and it's not funded by any taxes whatsoever, and it's not inflationary because it's not increasing the currency more than it already is. So yeah, it's really interesting to look at all the ways of doing this, and I hope that we get into land value taxes too as a part of the discussion, especially at like the city and state level. I love that Yang is even including like carbon taxes and financial transaction taxes as top part of this too. And I think that there's a big discussion and opportunity to have about like what should work as we go into the future, especially with automation. What's the best way of like going about an automation tax kind of situation? You know, like the VAT can kind of get at this in one way, but like at the same time, it's interesting that so much of this technology has been created by public investments. Like we, the taxpayer, really funded the level 1 R&D that is resulting in all these technologies. So it seems like we, the taxpayer, should get an ROI on this. So maybe we could do something like, say, every new corporation, you know, everything that goes public, they have to put in like 10% of their stock into like a sovereign wealth fund. And so then actually that fund will grow over time, and then it will be enhanced by technology, and then that's paying out a dividend that's rising over time. And so that's really to make sure that this rising technology works for everyone instead of just a few, by making sure that there's shared ownership as part of this as well. And this is all a great part of this conversation, and I love that we're even talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, so in the crypto world, because I've done some work in that, I mean, you really should come out and like go to some of these conferences, because
I have.
You have? Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're really open to it, right? So, and since the whole, crypto system is new, if it's built in from the beginning, right, it's easier like going down instead of trying to convince people in the old system, like, well, we've got to do this, like, well, okay. And in the meantime, we probably have to do both. But I mean, again, looking into the 22nd century, moving in there, when again, money as we know it has changed, but we're also, like you said, we're redefining what money is, what value is. And so, what does that mean, and how can we use it to better society? And I know one of the things, the banks are highly resistant to this, because, it's now the tech people are now controlling the system and not them. But even with Libra, a lot of the top banks and credit card companies are backing Libra because they just see like, well, we can't fight this thing. We better join in, right? And Facebook's going to do this. And what's interesting with Facebook's,
by the way, I'm not really in favor of Facebook doing any type of cryptocurrency. They are way too connected with Incutel. Like, yeah. I'm like not in favor of that.
Yeah.
Also, I just wanted to jump in here a little bit. Reading through some of the comment sections, the audience would like us to try and keep it concise and moving along. And so I just wanted to, before we wrap up this subject, another big thing in the chat was before the objection that Scott had made in terms of the welfare opt-out, they wanted to just have one opportunity for him to answer what he objected to.
How I object to the welfare opt-out?
Yeah, you beforehand when Stephanie was speaking, saying the main concerns with UBI is that people would have to.
Oh, so just talk about that.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I don't object to it. I think it's important because I think that again, the most important element of unconditional basic income is the unconditionality. And if we're stacking conditional programs on top of it, then we're still subjecting everybody to the harms of these conditions. And so like TANF is a great example. And I mean, people don't know the details of stuff like this, and you only get into it if you really get into it. Like TANF is this state block grant program, and states can do with it what they want to. And over time, it was supposed to be a cash welfare program for families. And then over time, they've reduced it and they've reduced it. So now only 23% of people living in poverty get cash assistance through TANF. And there are states like Louisiana where 4 out of 100 families receiving who are in poverty receive TANF. And it's even been shown that the conditions and like the weird things that TANF like gets funding, as far as like you've got to go to this class to learn that you should not have kids out of wedlock, and like these weird things that gets funding. Like these things actually increase the racial wealth gap for the child racial gap by 15%. Like that's actually TANF is increasing inequality. So if we have TANF on top of basic income, to me that doesn't make any sense. Like we should actually just use that block grant money to help fund basic income. And so it makes sense to give people an either or too, instead of saying we're just going to chop it off, because maybe there are some people in situations where they're receiving more than $1,000 in assistance through a combination of things, and they should be able to choose to keep that larger amount. But I think that by making this opt-in, people can choose for themselves what's better, what's more important to them, this full unconditional $1,000 or these other things. And I think there's also the misunderstanding too about what does stack and what doesn't stack. So like things like Social Security, SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance, these things exist on top of basic income, so that they're in addition to it. You're not losing those things. And a lot of people are saying, oh, you do lose those things. But the things that you would opt out of would be TANF and SNAP and supplemental security income, which is not Social Security, but it's focused on those who are mostly disabled or just extremely low income. And so these programs make sense because these conditions, if you look into the details and the effects of the conditions and what people are doing and what is being done to people through them, I want to liberate them from those. I want an emancipation from these conditions, but I want people to be able to choose that. And so that's what Yang is offering, and I think that makes sense.
Okay, thank you so much, Scott, for that clarification. So now we're moving on to our next set of individuals.
Hey, Scott, John, sorry, real quick. I'm sorry to do this. I have to leave at 1. We've gone 3.5 hours. I didn't think.
I was about to get into the fact that I wanted to just speed things up a little bit here. I want to be making sure that we're all cognizant that we have 90 seconds to respond. I've cut out a couple of the follow-up questions I was going to ask in each section so that we can move on with our day.
Yeah, sorry about that. I mean, this is great, but I'm just like, I didn't think that would go.
I know, and I'm certainly also getting that feedback here in the chat as well. Yeah. So I want to move on to our individual questions. We'll all be keeping in mind, let's keep it concise. So first, I want to give Niko the opportunity to ask Scott a question.
Just in general?
Yeah, a question about Andrew Yang.
What? So the biggest thing that I've noticed about Andrew Yang is his willing to capitulate to the foreign policy establishment when it comes to foreign policy. Is that something that you would agree with? And if so, is that something that you'd be willing or have seen other Yang supporters willing to do as far as pushing him left in that regard?
Well, I guess we need some examples, because already just like using the phrasing of capitulation against these things,
I don't see that. So for example, we know now that Russia basically had nothing to do with our 2016 elections turning out the way that it did. And yet he constantly fear mongers in this McCarthyist rhetoric that he's engaged with on the debate stage and in other venues. His language on Israel and Palestine, quite honestly, it scares the hell out of me sometimes. But basically, if whatever mainstream narrative there is out there to be followed when it comes to the foreign policy, that's where it basically seems like that's the line that he toes. And so whether we're talking about Maduro, Assad, the Israel-Palestine conflict, Russia-Gate, I mean, all of it, China even, it just seems like he kind of toes the establishment line in that regard.
Well, okay, so first of all, I mean, I guess we just disagree on about if Russia had anything whatsoever to do in influencing our elections. I mean with the outcome of our election. So I want to be very clear about that. They're superpowers, so they're going to influence it, however, because all of the superpowers do. But the outcome. But we know that they were influencing, but we can't say if they didn't influence it, if the election would have gone another way. Like, we can't possibly know that either way. All we can do is say that, did they influence or did they not influence? So I think that even when it comes to something like that, I think that the discussion should not be around, what should we do to Russia in retaliation. I think we have to be realistic and pragmatic and go, like you said, other countries are going to want to influence our elections. So we've got to make sure that our elections are actually strong enough and resilient enough, and have things like ranked choice voting and these other and democracy dollars, these are the things that make it so that that influence is drowned out. And so I think that's important.
So can I give a quick response to that, John?
Well,
John, do you mind if I give a quick response?
Yeah, keep it quick. Yeah.
Okay. So basically, the reason I think it's important is because there's a reason that we're saying Russia over and over again, but we never mentioned Israel's influence. We never mentioned Saudi Arabia's influence. We never mentioned Turkey's influence. The list really does go on. And that we have to be mindful. Well, what my point is, though, that we have to be mindful in attempts to manufacture consent. That's why I think it's such a big deal when we echo the establishment's narrative versus the actual narrative. So I would agree that Russia probably had some type of influence. They're a superpower. It'd be stupid for them not to, given our presence and everybody else's influence. But what follows next is faulty election justice or election integrity legislation, which is trash, but they're using the Russian narrative to prop it up. They're using McCarthyism to prop it up. You have sanctions that have been lobbied against the people, because sanctions always hurt people and not the government, because of that narrative. And yet we don't have these sanctions against Saudi Arabia or Israel. And so you see how the shit rolls downhill whenever we're not addressing the narrative as it is, rather than, because that's my issue. Not that he's saying that Russia had something to do with it, is that he has honed in on the establishment talking points regarding Russia in that specific instance, rather than speaking about it in a general way. So that's my main point.
Yeah, I guess.
Hey, can we move on to the next question? We'd love to have you now ask a question for Stephanie.
Okay, I just wanted just a very quick thing, 30 seconds. I just want to say that so as a Tulsi supporter, I know foreign policy is really important to you, and I guess as a Yang supporter, it's not as important to me as domestic policy, because I feel that domestic policy really influences foreign policy. So I want to help create a population who is economically secure enough and the democracy is strong enough where we interact differently with foreign nations, and that, we actually reduce the influence of lobbying and, the military industrial complex and all that.
Okay, thank you, Scott. And now your question for Stephanie and Bernie.
Yeah, so I guess I like this question, so I'm just going to ask the same question I asked before. So Stephanie, what policy do you feel that Bernie is lacking that you really want to see him add? Like if you could sit down with Bernie and convince him of a policy to add, what would it be?
Actually, I'm glad you asked that. So one of the things that I do is with factory farm system. The one policy, most people don't know this. There is not one federal level law that protects factory farm animals during their short, brutal life. Not one. Chickens, turkey, poultry are not even covered under the humane slaughter law because they're not considered livestock. They're just considered a commodity. So the one policy that I would love Bernie Sanders or any candidate to include in their rural policies is animal welfare. Particularly targeting, factory to farm systems, because there's very little legislation around the factory farm system because of the powerful lobbies of big ag and big meat. And now we're seeing, the Amazon burning, and a big reason for that is because of cattle ranching and growing soybeans to feed livestock. So, yeah, the one thing that, again, as I'm like, Bernie, we need federal level animal welfare laws, because there is none right now protecting any of these animals. And the fact that recently Bernie just came out with a new campaign ad talking about the factory farm system, and he touched on animal abuse and welfare. So I'm like, great, the door's open. So now can we get some laws to protect these farm animals, because no one is fighting for them at the top level. The big ag and big meat have controlled all of this. So this would be a huge thing. And for a lot of voters, animal welfare and animal rights is a big deal for them. So in terms of taking care of humans, we should also look at taking care of our animals as well. And not just dogs and cats. Like I'm talking cows, chickens and turkeys, because again, it blew my mind that turkeys, the most eaten, quote, healthy meat, is not even protected under the humane slaughter law. So all these brutal films you see on YouTube are actually legal. Unless the state has a law, it's legal. So I would like to see that.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Stephanie. And now to quickly wrap up, do you have a question for Niko as well as Tulsi?
Yeah, so one of the things I love about Tulsi is that she, brings up Monsanto, and like we got to rein them in. So just since I was talking about rural, what are Tulsi's plan for rural America? And if she has anything around factory farms.
She does have a plan to deal with factory farming and the agriculture industry in general. To my understanding, when she's about to reintroduce the OFF Act, and that's actually going to be a part of the OFF Act, because the factory farming greatly contributes to climate change and environmental issues here in the States. She herself is actually vegetarian, and to my understanding, she's mostly vegan. And so this is kind of an issue that she talks about a lot. And, being from, I live in Miami now, but I went to college in the Research Triangle Park, where UNC, NC State for engineering, and Duke for medical. Monsanto, that's where it is. And so, I've had a lot of interactions with protesters when it comes to Monsanto, and people have no idea just how dangerous they are and just how influential they are in corrupting our food supply. We couldn't get a representative for her here, but I'll go ahead and mention her names. Marianne Williamson brings up great points when she constantly tackles the food supply problem that we have. I think that it doesn't get discussed enough. And Monsanto is a great contributor to that problem. And so that is something that actually kind of made me wide out a little bit when I saw Marianne. I was like, hold up, did she just say what I think she said? Because if we're going to talk about Medicare for all and all this other stuff, how about we talk about preventing some of the main causes for our medical issues, which oftentimes goes back to our food consumption.
Okay, thank you so much for that answer, Niko. So now I'd like to move on to our final section on the universal topics. I would like to just cut one of them out for the sake of time, since I know some of us have to leave in 17 minutes. So I know we've done a lot of discussion on foreign policy, so I think we have really given our perspective on that and why these people are qualified to lead the world. So I'd like to just finalize in terms of universal topics on education. So one of the distinctions between the camps is regard to how we address the cost of college. I wanted to ask first, do you support free public college? And why do you think that is important if you do? I'll start with Stephanie.
So Bernie has the College for All Act, right? So that guarantees college education at public colleges and universities. And importantly, it also covers vocational and trade. And I think, again, since we're talking about technology, this becomes important because today's handyman and mechanic is going to be more software technician than hardware. So we need the vocational and technical schools so they can learn how to, with the electrical cars, the Internet of Things, blockchain comes in, and we have all these devices. So software is going to become a bigger point, and we need education. So automation is taking over a lot of manufacturing, but we have a lot of technology that will also bring new jobs, right? Again, with these new technologies, so we need to train all these people. Again, they're going to need more like software learning and systems learning. So we have the College for All Act, and so with that, Bernie also has canceled student debt. So this student debt impacts 45 million Americans. So, that will create like a huge relief right there when people who have $50, $100, $300,000 in student debt, that is perpetual. There's people who are collecting their Social Security and still paying off their student debt, right? Bernie wants to wipe that out. And the way he'll pay for it is a small speculation tax on Wall Street, because, since we bailed them out, it's their turn to help out the working class of America. So again, we have the College for All Act, and on top of that, cancel student debt so that nobody is punished because they want to get, a better education and improve their lives. But also we're seeing young kids who high school kids who don't want to go to college because all they see from their elders is them complaining about their debt and worrying. So why would they go into that? But again, you can go into vocational and trade schools, which again, a lot of that is going to be moving into teaching about the new technologies that are out there and all the new jobs, like with AI too. There are jobs in 10, 20 years, we have no idea what they're going to be yet. So, again, the vocational and trade schools can start teaching and getting those people ready for those new jobs.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. So Niko, do you believe that we need free public college for all?
Yeah, and Tulsi actually was one of the co-sponsors of the College for All Act. That's the heir apparent to Bernie's in the House. And I want to take it a different route, actually. I would say I'm a recent college grad, so and, you know, the way college has kind of been undertaken has changed over the generations. The thing that is more valuable than the education that you get at any particular college is the experience. I would say 70% of it is experience and networking. That experience allows us to have this discussion and this meshing of ideas and understanding of different people's cultures, their backgrounds. You interact with rich kids, poor kids, young, older, non-traditional students. And with that, you take that experience into the real world, and it makes you much more prepared and adept to dealing with the real life situations in the real world. No matter what college degree you get, when you get to your job, you're going to be trained for your specific job. But that experience and that networking you get cannot be underestimated. And what college education and university education allows you to do is to get that those interactions that a school district can't give you, because generally school districts have very simplified makeups, right? They're either all rich, all poor, or a little bit 50-50, but never doesn't really have a huge amount of international students engaging with local domestic students, poor students mixing with kids, local kids, things like that. It's the experience is, in my opinion, as a recent college grad, the most important thing. And I believe that's why College for All is the most important, when we're talking about dealing with education. I think that we have to do other things like stop allowing the local education system to be determined by 90% property taxes when we know what that 93% actually. That's a racist policy. It was implemented during the segregationist era, and it was specifically created to keep Black neighborhoods and those schools from getting the type of resources that white neighborhoods were getting. I think we need to do away with that. But as far as the college level, I definitely believe that College for All is the best way to go. Based off of your not your need, but your actually ability to contribute to that university in a fundamental way.
Okay. Scott, what are your thoughts on that? Should we be having free public college for all? I think of the group, Yang is one of the few that doesn't go all the way to free public college.
Yeah, so I think that there's in this context of not having a basic income and the world as it is, I feel that a big part of our problem even right now is people being underemployed based on their education, that they're, maybe they got a college education and that isn't really what they wanted, or it wasn't what they pursued, like it wasn't their interest. Instead, they went to get a job, and now maybe they're in a job that isn't really what they want, or it's a job that doesn't even use their college educations. And now, of course, you've got all these people too who have these student loans that are from this education. So I feel that, as Yang has said, we're over prescribing college. So I think that as it makes sense to me as a transition forward into the future where we could have public four-year college, and it makes sense to do public, make community college very cheap or free. Start there. And also, again, as Stephanie was talking about, that also as part of Yang stuff, as promoting vocational educations, making sure that people have more of a choice. And again, basic income helps that become more possible, that you can choose, like, do I want to get a college education or, four-year degree? Do I want to pay for this to do something that I'm not really interested in? I think it was 2006 maybe, or somewhere around there, where we actually flipped from people going to school to study something that they care about to actually studying to get a job. So I think that I don't think that's what the point of education is. I think that the point of education is to create higher thinking or creative, more educated human beings, and it's not about getting a job. So let's kind of separate those things and make sure that part of this is that we are making education as affordable as possible. Let's reverse this ridiculous growth in like administrative salaries. Let's figure out ways of keeping these costs down. And like one of his ideas that was interesting too is like say, hey, these schools are purposely essentially restricting their supply because they want to make sure that few people can say graduate from Harvard, and so there should be something. His policy is like, well, let's actually put some of their fund, essentially a transfer of their endowment fund to create other colleges elsewhere in the country. Let's say you would start and make one in Ohio, and then thanks to that endowment transfer over the years, and you create another one elsewhere. So there's a lot of creative ideas there that I like, and I think that that really the key is just making these steps forward and opening up these new avenues that exist, and even just the big difference that basic income would make as far as essentially being like universal tuition and room and board or whatever, you're opening a lot more options that way. So that's what I think is a good idea.
Okay, thank you, Scott. So I'd like to just give each of you like a 30-second rebuttal so that we can get to all of our audience submitted questions before we wrap up today and give our final remarks. Stephanie, do you have anything to say on Niko or Scott's comments?
Well, again, I think the emphasis is, again, we have the same goal, is that, we're offering programs for people to get a higher education so they can improve their lives and their careers. We have different pathways to them. I mean, Bernie's is offering college for everybody at a public and college or university. He wants to cancel all student debt and give people a way to just start fresh and not look at education as some kind of punishment, but actually something that betters all of society. So again, he, in my opinion, he has the strongest plan with that, because again, regardless of what income level you're at, you will get the opportunity to higher education as a right, which is included in his 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie, for those thoughts. Niko, do you have any final remarks on the subject of higher education?
I think we generally agree. I mean, it's nice to agree. That's basically my last thoughts on that.
Okay, great. Scott, do you have any final thoughts on the subject of higher education?
Yeah, so I guess I just want to point out too that another idea of Yang's that I like is what he calls the 10-10 plan. And so that means that, let's say you go to college, you rack up, say $50,000 debt or something, and then wherever you work there for 10 years and you pay 10% of what you're earning. And at the end of the 10 years, then you're done. Your debt is forgiven. So I think that it's something like that makes sense as going forward to really kind of enable people to pursue the educations that they care about, get the jobs that they would prefer, and still not be burdened by this debt.
Okay, thank you for that. So now, as we would all love to talk education further, whether it be pre-K or primary education, debating charters, we're going to move on now to our fan questions. So first, we're going to start with Stephanie with the question here. What economic plan does Bernie have for people who make more than $15 an hour right now, but are still struggling paycheck to paycheck and can't afford a financial emergency or save for retirement? This coming from Bryce Goldberg.
Okay. Well, three big things that immediately come to mind is just stopping like financial bleeding. So big one, cancel student debt. So you have any of that, that's all gone. He announced just the other day, he will also cancel medical debt. So past due medical debt. And one thing that it's not talked about often, which is really awesome, is that he will also cap credit card interest rates at 15%. So he actually has a bill with AOC, the Loan Shark Protection Act, but credit card interest rates have gotten out of control. I mean, they're now up to like 25, 30%. If you're late, it's up to like 35, 40, whatever. So, he's going to cap it at 15%. And as a small business owner, that made me really excited because we live a lot off of credit, right? And you have a lot of families who are using their credit cards to pay for food, gas, right? Basic living. And so they're paying a lot of money in interest. So you have the combination of, you will no longer have student debt, medical debt, and you will have a low interest credit cards, like right there lifts huge financial burden off the family income right off the bat.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Stephanie. I'll move on now to Niko. The question that was posed to Tulsi Gabbard was, assuming that she gets the nomination, would you like to see Bernie or Andrew Yang hold a cabinet position in her administration? And this is from Human-Centered P1.
So I would actually like to see both of them. I think Yang's points about automation should not fall on deaf ears. I see it every day. I think that, you know, there could be some debate about the rate of automation, but that's inconsequential. It's like debating the rate of climate change. Is it coming or is it not? And it is absolutely coming. It's absolutely something we need to deal with. And I do believe that Yang has presented himself to be an expert in that category. I think that Bernie would be a fantastic vice president for Tulsi. And the reason why is because as VP, he'll be spending a lot of his time in the Senate, where he is comfortable at, where he is influential at, and where he is the best at, in my opinion, because he'll be dealing with a lot more domestic issues that as president, Tulsi would not have as much power over. I would say 70% of being president is foreign policy, and then 30% is domestic. And even with domestic policy, once again, you're oftentimes left up to the laurels of your legislature. So with Bernie as a VP going around, he has more freedom to go around the country, galvanize people to pass progressive policies. He doesn't always have to be in Washington. He doesn't always have to take those trips abroad. He can be here doing what he's always done, which is being a fighter for progressive change and being an activist and an organizer, getting those senators out, flipping the Senate, flipping the House, and making sure that we all win going into 2024, rather than, you know, us just getting a president and be like, okay, we're done. So that's what I would like to see.
Okay, thank you so much, Niko. So now, Scott, the final question for you and Andrew Yang is, how would you best design a VAT tax? Like, what would be exempted and what wouldn't be?
Yeah, so that's actually pretty easy for me. Is I prefer just having a straight up universal 10%, because I recognize that then you capture the widest amount and it still is highly progressive. The only thing I would change is that I would prefer a slightly higher amount of basic income in order to compensate for that VAT. So, you know, you could have like an $1,100 freedom dividend, and then that would compensate so that you're still at $1,000 as far as buying power goes, potentially. But I think that as soon as you add in these various things, you make it much more complicated, and it's much more of an administrative burden. And I just don't think it's necessary because of the basic income. In other countries, it is absolutely necessary to figure out what are the right rates and stuff. But the beauty of combining with the basic income is you don't have to worry about that. You can just have a straight up flat 10%, and it will still be progressive.
Okay, thank you so much, Scott. So now I'd like to move us all to our now final remarks. While giving your speech on why you believe your candidate is the most qualified, I'd also like to give you all the opportunity to plug any upcoming works that you have on your own individual bases. So again, I'll start with Stephanie. Let's try and keep at least the argument for the candidate to 60 seconds.
Yeah, so Bernie Sanders will be the working class president. He will stand up to the oligarchs, the billionaires, the corporatocracy, the 1%, to fight for a system that works for all of us and not just the few. So he will also be the commander-in-chief of peace, with years, decades of experience for racial, social, economic, and environmental justice. He has been very successful in galvanizing and emphasizing that millions of Americans come together. So on top of President Sanders taking on the oligarchs and the 1%, he needs all of us to come together as Americans and as the 99% to demand the transformative change that we need, because we're in a situation, not only economically with people just wanting to live, but we have the existential threat of climate change. And the new president in 2021 will have 10 years before the irreparable damage happens. And Bernie Sanders is in the strongest position, again, with policies, years of experience and proven consistency, integrity, trust. A lot of people trust him. And, finally, he's just focused on how do we, again, create the higher, the higher good of all. So we have, again, a country that works for all of us, not just the few.
Okay, great. And are there any shout outs you'd like to give for the people who are watching out there, what they can check out for you upcoming?
Oh yeah, so one important thing, I do my campaigning on the Burn identity, which is burn_identity. And that's all about all things Bernie Sanders. And if you want to learn more about Bernie or meet other burners, that account exploded. Like I was not expecting how much support and activity has gone there. But I tweet a lot of things just about his campaign, his policies, his events, like the whole spectrum. And I focus on staying positive and focus on what a President Sanders. So for those of you who also want to break from just the ugly of Twitter, I focus on positive and only on Bernie Sanders primarily. So the Bern identity on Twitter, BERN_identity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Stephanie. And everyone should go check her out and give a follow. She's gone through the gauntlet here of a very long debate, and she deserves that. So now,
all of us.
All of you will, but I'll get to each of you when you come. So Niko, I want to give you now your 60 seconds to make the case. Why is Tulsi Gabbard the best candidate for president? And then finally, what you have upcoming for yourself.
So Tulsi Gabbard is what I would call humanity's president because of the evolution. I think that we can all agree that over the last 5 to 6 years, we have all evolved. If you have been static politically, then I don't know if you've been paying attention. And Tulsi is emblematic of that evolution. No, she's not perfect or she was not perfect on LGBTQ issues, for example, but she evolved to a 100% voting record in that regard. She was not perfect on the military industrial complex. And she went from that to calling out the intelligence community because of their influence over the military industrial complex. She was not perfect in any way, form, or fashion when she first started politics at 21. And yet, because of those struggles, she learned, she grew from her experiences. And we have the candidate that we have today, a 38-year-old millennial who stood up to the Democratic Party when they tried to corrupt the election against Bernie Sanders, who's standing up to the Democratic Party now and the Republican Party now as they try to corrupt the elections, who's introduced election integrity legislation, something that we all talk about, but nobody seems to be taking seriously, at least in the legislature. All these things, willing to take the heat for meeting with Assad and his opposition, willing to take the heat for meeting with Modi and his opposition, willing to say sanctions are an act of war and they hurt the people rather than like all of these things. We need someone who is unafraid to say basic truths and then show the conviction to do something about those things. And I believe that Tulsi Gabbard has been the best and the most consistent and has demonstrated in her short time in politics that nobody asking you to be perfect your entire career. We're asking for genuine evolution, and then for that evolution, to transition into solutions, and then demonstrating the conviction to execute those solutions. And Tulsi has demonstrated all of those things. And for me, I have a Twitter at NikoCSFB, and I also have a media network on YouTube, the MCSC network. You can just Google Niko House or type in Niko House on YouTube. It'll come up. We cover a lot of candidates. Obviously, we mostly cover Tulsi. We could cover a lot of Bernie, but we also cover a lot of foreign policy issues there and all that good stuff. So yeah, and I'm supposed to be, right now I'm in talks to debate at Politicon as well. So if you want to see me at Politicon and keep updated with that, follow me on Twitter at Niko CSFB and on YouTube at Niko House.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Niko. Everyone should go check him out, and we look forward to finding out who you'll likely be debating at Politicon. That should be a great experience for everyone to check out as well. So Scott, want to make the case now, 60 seconds. Why is Andrew Yang the person we should all pick for president in 2020?
Yeah, so Yang's campaign is not left or right, it's forward, and that's the direction that we need to go. We need to be pragmatic in making sure that we go forward. Trump was elected for reasons. Those reasons still exist. Economic insecurity is growing. Inequality is growing. People are just barely getting by month to month. And we've got serious deadlines. Automation is coming, and automation is an incredible opportunity to make the world better. And if we don't, things are going to get worse. Climate change is here. We're feeling its effects today. Florida is feeling the effects of climate change. We've got to remove this boot from people's throats. We've got to make sure that we lift people unconditionally. Yang is the one who's talking about that. He's pushing this forward. And I just think that it's so important that we solve these problems that got Trump elected. We expand our democracy. And especially that's true in the Democratic Party. I feel that that Trump got elected because their primary worked more democratically than the Democratic Party's function. And that's a serious problem too. So after that, I just want to say that I just want to remind people that September 21st is the first Basic Income March that's happening in New York. So go to basicincome.march.com and sign up and try to make it to New York. Hopefully it'll be a big thing with a lot of people coming to actually march from all walks of life for basic income. And for me personally, I just set up scottsantens.news. So it's a newsletter just to stay informed as to what I've written most recently, podcast appearances, and even like yanking information. So yeah, that's my stuff.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Scott. And yeah, everyone should actually try and come out to the Basic Income March. I'm going to be there myself, actually. So if you want to see both of us there, that might be a great opportunity for you to check out. And now I just want to thank all three of you. I'm huge fans of all of your work, and I'm so proud that you would come on today to debate for your favorite candidates. I want to thank the fans out there for staying through the gauntlet just like we did, all 4 hours, and helping us actually share this event so that it could grow into something larger. I think it's really important that we get to all these policy details, and so I'm really happy we were able to have this chance. Before wrapping up, I just want to give a couple quick plugs for the website. We're actually going to be having upcoming episodes where we're going to be featuring groups of Yang supporters, Bernie supporters, and Tulsi supporters for our ongoing Me+3 segment so that we can further talk about why these are our best candidates. We are going to be also featuring this with a younger group of people, likely around 16, because all 3 of these candidates support 16-year-olds being able to have the right to vote. So next, we are going to have more than just these candidate-focused ones. We're going to be having conversations about political strategy, foreign policy, and likely more about our medical system and climate. Finally, we have a new website that just got put up. It's called thehillofroses.com. Pretty simple. Everyone should go check it out. It has all of our content on it. And then finally, if you haven't yet voted, we do an ongoing Democratic primary poll where we're trying to listen to all of you so that we can get demographic details, so that we can get candidate alliances, so we can get grade distribution, so we can actually hear you make your persuasive arguments. So we're going to link that out to you all. Make sure you go check that out. And finally, this is going to be a recording. This doesn't just have to be a live experience. Go send this out to all your friends who are wondering, why are these the best candidates in the field and why should they choose yours? With that being said, Rosebuds, I want you to stay rosy, and I look forward to talking to you next time. Okay. Peace.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.